Hey guys, how are you all? Welcome back to my channel. Today we will see what if Naruto refuses to work for Tsunade. If you enjoy, then please like, share and do comments. Chocolate brown eyes took in the people assembled around the table, the head of their owner resting on a fist which was propped on the arm of a chair. They were the Council of Konoha, and they consisted of clan heads and important civilians within Konoha. Alongside them were Sandame's former teammates Homura and Kaharu, as well as Danzo, a skilled diplomat, crippled war hawk, and most importantly, irritating thorn in the side of the Hokage and Konoha's beliefs. Of course, any gathering of the useless would be considered incomplete without these three, the village elders, or as Tsunade called them, the village ingrown toenails. Why in the hell did you ever create the Council of Konoha, Grandpa? Tsunade thought, then sighed softly as she remembered that it had been need to ensure that the fledgling village would survive its founding. It had been a necessary evil when it had been made, because all the work that went into creating the village required so much of Hashirama's attention that he needed as much help as he could get. And being the kind of man he was, he allowed the clans and civilians to make it up, so that a wider array of problems were taken care of and different sectors had a voice in Konoha's creation. Unfortunately, by the time the council was no longer necessary and was to be disbanded, they had burrowed deep, creating laws to keep the council together and able to keep as much power as possible. Hashirama did what he could to limit that power, but much like himself, they were shrewd manipulators. Skills born from before Konoha was a gleam in the eye of either Uchiha or Senju, and he was forced to give enough to keep them satisfied. Tobirama, Hiruzen, and Minato were thus forced to deal with increasingly greedy and power-hungry men and women, working to try and undermine the Hokage and gain more power for themselves and their clan. The worst was the old warhawk Danzo, who was like an inoperable tumor of Konoha, always spreading, infecting wherever he could, his disease spreading through the wood of the tree, causing decay and death wherever it touched. Tsunade-sama. The voice of Kohaku broke through the woman's thoughts, bored brown eyes turning to the elderly woman as she asked, "What is it, Kohaku? Have the hens finally stopped clucking about inconsequential nonsense and ended the pointless pissing contests? Can the ninja actually get to work now?" The civilians scowled at her as several clan heads laughed, with Chao's deep laugh echoing throughout the meeting room, accompanied by the barking laughter of Sume. Shikaku and Inoichi merely smiled and chuckled respectively, Shibi's Kakaichu buzzing lightly, sounding pleased by her words. She noted that some of the clan heads, particularly Hiashi, were also scowling, recognizing the dig against him and others. "Yes, well, on to business," Homura said, trying to bring the room under some semblance of order after Tsunade's remarks. "Of course," Tsunade said, straightening up and folding her hands on the table, her appearance more businesslike than before. Nodding to the Godem Hokage, Kohaku picked up a small stack of papers and began going through them. She knew that she had to be careful with how they went about this, since their plan was treading on thin ice with the Hokage. But not going through with it would bring an angry Uchiha Itachi down upon herself, Danzo, and Homura for the events surrounding the Uchiha massacre. And Konoha, despite its strength, could not keep him from getting his vengeance upon them. So it was in their best interest to appease the man before he comes after them. Adjusting her reading glasses, she looked at the first piece of paperwork and spoke aloud. "Our first order of business deals with the proposal of a man wishing to start a new, shinobi-only bookstore." Due to years of experience, Tsunade managed to keep the appearance of attentiveness as the council went over the business for the day. Most of it was civilian matters or trivial ninja matters, mostly involving personal complaints and grievances, which rested under the council's jurisdiction. Thus, she was able to allow her mind to drift without worry, only having to appear attentive. And this was something she was incredibly skilled at, having been a high-ranking shinobi for years before her self-imposed exile. And even then, she was able to get plenty of practice while listening to her assistant and apprentice Shizune fret and worry over their financial matters. As various orders of business were passed around for the council to discuss, the Godem Hokage's mind drifted to the blonde who had first convinced her to return to the village in the first place, Uzumaki Naruto. Despite initial distaste for the blonde, he had managed to break through the barriers surrounding her heart, allowing her to finally trust and care for another again. Looking at him, she saw the indomitable spirit and heart of her lover Dan and little brother Nawaki in him, the will of fire, if you will. Lately, she had often found herself wondering should either have had lived, would she have nephew or son like him? Smiling internally, she realized that if she'd had a son, he would indeed be like the energetic, ramen-addicted boy she cared for. Even his nickname for her, Ba-chan, was growing on her, and increasingly she was seeing the young shinobi as a grandson, much like Sarutobi-sensei had before her. It seemed that, given a chance, the boy could bring the best out of you and make you love him in spite of yourself. Quote. Pardon of Uchiha Sasuke. Tsunade was forced from her thoughts at hearing those words, eyes turning to Kohaku as the council erupted. The civilians were cheering for such a thing to happen, while most of the ninja were enraged at the thought of pardoning a traitor. Enough, Tsunade barked, and at once the room went deathly quiet. Tsunade might be considered a gambling lush, but she was still Hokage, and still had the strength to crush skulls like most people crush roaches beneath their shoe. And such strength was respected by civilian and ninja, no matter who wielded it. Now, why may I ask, are we even considering pardoning a traitor to Konoha, one who planned to run to Orochimaru, the murderer of the Sandaime Hokage, and whose defection caused severe injury to 6 loyal ninja? Tsunade asked, and Kohaku knew that the emphasis on the word loyal was no accident. Well, Hokage-sama, it seems that there were extenuating circumstances involving the curse seal he had received from Orochimaru and its effects on him. Kohaku said, treading carefully over the subject. Such as? Tsunade asked, her tone was low and calm, but she was giving off the aura of a predator stalking its unwary prey, crouched and ready to pounce at the opportune moment. Well, exams of both seal and child have shown that its effects on his body and mental state are quite pronounced. Kohaku said, and Tsunade raised an eyebrow as she replied, I'd heard that it had been effectively sealed by the boy's Junin sensei not a couple days after he had received it. From my understanding, it takes longer than that for pronounced effects to be had. Of course, Hokage-sama. Kohaku agreed, and Tsunade nodded as she continued, and that the seal placed by one Hitaki Kakashi was based around the willpower of the person the seal was on. Which means that for the seal Orochimaru gave him to have affected the boy at all, much like it did during his battle against Genin Uzumaki Naruto at the Valley of the End, then he must be weak-willed. Something a shinobi should not be. However, his contact with one Uchiha Itachi in Tanzaku town had negative effects on the mind of the boy, and weakened his will enough for the seal to take advantage. Kohaku said, and Tsunade retorted, but Uchiha Sasuke should not have been in Tanzaku town in the first place to meet up with his brother, since he had no permission to leave the village at that time. He left of his own free will to locate and confront Uchiha Itachi, an act most would consider suicidal, at best. The fact the child got away with but a broken arm and placed under the Tsukiyomi is a miracle. Of course, Hokage-sama, that has been taken into account. And while we wish to pardon Uchiha Sasuke, we also want to revoke his rights and privileges as a shinobi, leaving him a civilian. We will also have a tracking seal placed on him to ensure he does not attempt to defect to Orochimaru again. Kohaku said, and Tsunade studied the elderly woman as she asked, why do you care so much for one genin? Because, Hokage-sama, Danzo took over for Kohaku, and Tsunade's predatory brown eyes turned to him as he explained, the Uchiha's Sharingan is too valuable for us to lose, and having him locked away will cause such a resource to be lost forever. I believe that would be no great loss. Hiyashi stated, and Danzo turned to the Hyuga head as he said, you would believe that, Hiyashi-sama. The feud between the Hyuga and the Uchiha clans is well recorded both before and after the creation of the village. However, just because you believe that, does not make it true. I do. All it does is create arrogant and untrustworthy shinobi, who believe their personal wants deserve to be placed above the good of the village. A belief that is not tempered by the civilians, nor unfortunately by the previous Hokage, as his actions at the last Chunin exam showed. Inoichi said, and Danzo looked toward the blonde man as he asked, how do you mean, Inoichi-sama? I mean that the Uchiha was allowed to be over an hour late, something that must not be tolerated, and most certainly would not have been if it had been Shikamaru-kun, Gaara-san, or especially Uzumaki-san. Inoichi said, and the civilian council let their thoughts be vocally known about the Uzumaki boy, which allowed the village elders a temporary smirk at their reaction. Quiet, Tsunade yelled, and looked toward the elders as she asked, so, You wish for Uchiha Sasuke to be rendered a civilian of Konoha, with a tracking seal placed on him to make sure he doesn't attempt to escape again, so he can reproduce and give us more little Uchihas? At seeing their nods, she sighed, and closing her eyes she said, "Very well. Despite my best judgment, I shall allow it. Only on the condition that he submits to proper psychological evaluation, then receives the emotional and psychological help he needed but was denied after the Uchiha massacre. Also, I want Jiraiya to properly seal that horrid cursed mark, and to seal off all his chakra but that which his body requires to survive so that he will offer less of a threat to others." They nodded in agreement with this, and Danzo said, "Now, about the Kyuubi child." The killing intent radiating off the Hokage caused the civilians to begin gasping as they found themselves short of breath, and even the shinobi were sweating slightly. Danzo felt an uncomfortable tightness in his chest from it, and a chill ran down his spine, not unlike someone was dancing on his grave, as he heard the female Hokage ask, "What about Uzumaki Naruto?" According to Anbu reports from the Valley of the End, there was a large amount of the Kyuubi's chakra permeating the area shortly after the battle. Danzo said, a low murmur beginning to sound from the civilians. A necessary evil for Uzumaki Naruto to combat the cursed mark wielded by Uchiha Sasuke. It was no accident, nor was it a sign of the seal weakening, Danzo. It was a defense mechanism placed there by the Yondaime Hokage in case of emergencies to protect Naruto and ensure his continued existence, as well as ensure the Kyuubi does not escape upon his death. Tsunade retorted, and Danzo asked, "How can we be so sure of that?" "Because the Yondaime wrote that down himself within the scroll bearing the Shiki Fuin, and has been supported by his teacher, Jiraiya. If we cannot trust the work of two of the greatest seal masters to ever exist, then who shall we trust? Homura and Kohaku? Or maybe you and your Root?" Tsunade asked, and Danzo scowled as he said, "You know that Root was disbanded by the foolish Sandaime Hokage years." Bullshit, Danzo. No one honestly believes that, especially not the Junin who see Anbu in Konoha bearing the ni kanji upon their mask. Tsunade replied, and Danzo's scowl deepened as he said, "We are not here to discuss a defunct organization, Tsunade-sama. We are here to discuss Uzumaki Naruto and the danger he presents to Konoha. Which we both know is none, Danzo." As stated before, the seal placed on Naruto was a collaboration of both Jiraiya and Namikaze Minato, two of the greatest seal masters to ever exist. To doubt the seal is to doubt them, something I refuse to allow happen. Minato's genius is touted in the streets by shinobi and civilian alike, and that seal is a work of that genius. Tsunade replied, and Danzo said, "But it is 12 years old. Surely degeneration can happen to even the greatest seals. That is why Jiraiya, Minato's teacher and a seal master of his caliber, inspects it every so often to ensure that degeneration has not happened. If such a thing has happened, then Jiraiya can easily repair it before it becomes dangerous to Konoha. And Uzumaki Naruto is one of the most loyal shinobi to ever live, so we do not need to worry about him being a threat to us either." Tsunade countered, and Danzo's jaw clenched as that door was shut before he could enter it. "How can we be so assured of his loyalty, Tsunade-sama?" one of the civilians asked, and Tsunade said, "Because he has never once shown any sign of betraying Konoha, unlike Uchiha Sasuke. He has protected us from danger time and again, even doing so since birth by holding back the Kyuubi. He wishes to have acknowledgement from the people of Konoha, to earn their respect. If he were not loyal to our village and its people, then he would not have such hopes. Only the Inuzuka clan can rival his loyalty to our village. But, enough," Tsunade growled, adding, "We are not here to discuss Uzumaki Naruto, a loyal Konoha shinobi who, along with the rest of a team put together by Shikamaru and aided by the children of the late Case Cage, went above and beyond the call of duty and accomplished a mission that would have given Junin trouble. I am merely concerned with the safety of Konoha and its people, as is the daimyo." Danzo calmly said, and Tsunade's eyes narrowed dangerously as she asked, "And why exactly are you bringing him up?" "Merely because the day after the Uchiha incident, I sent the daimyo the reports gathered by Anbu and asked for his input. He says that he agrees with Kohaku, Homura, and myself on the subject of Genin Uzumaki Naruto. I just hoped that we could get you to see the light concerning the Jinchuriki, but unfortunately it seems your personal feelings for the child are clouding your judgment." How dare you? All eyes suddenly turned to the dark-haired Inuzuka matriarch. Even a stunned Tsunade, who had risen to her feet and looked about moments from leaping at the village elders, and ripping their throats out with her teeth. What do you mean, Inuzuka-san? Danzo asked, and Sume felt her hackles rise as she growled. I mean that you have gone behind the back of our leader and undermined her authority. For the good of the village only, Inuzuka-san. Danzo replied, but this time Shikaku spoke up and said, bullshit. From what I've seen and heard from my son, Uzumaki Naruto is not a danger to our village nor its people. He has been nothing but loyal to both in a situation that most would have long since betrayed up, if the reports and rumors I've heard. Loyal, with all those pranks he's pulled? A civilian asked, and Shibi answered, observation by both myself and my clan seemed to indicate that those pranks were merely a cry for attention in an environment where he was all but denied acknowledgement of any form. For a child in their most formulative stage of life, such acts are normally seen as cruel to the point of emotional abuse, but it seems they were overlooked in his case. The fact he only pulled harmless jokes upon the people who denied him his very right to exist speaks highly of his mental and emotional fortitude. That is but your sympathetic opinion, Aburame-san. Kohaku said, then continued, however, it seems that the daimyo isn't quite willing to take complete control from the Hokage and council. He has agreed to endorse whatever decision the council reaches. But seeing as we are not completely heartless, we won't ask for execution. How very generous of you. Tsunade growled, and Homura asked, all those in favor of the banishment of Genin Uzumaki Naruto from the ranks of Konohagakure? Tsunade felt her heart drop and her skin pale as the entire civilian half of the council, the village elders, Hiyashi, and 2 of the minor clans raised their hands. That right there sealed the innocent blonde's fate. And all those against? Tsunade raised her hand, as did Shibi, Shikaku, Inoichi, Sume, Shuza, and the remaining minor clan. Forcing herself to hide her pleased smile, Kohaku pushed herself onto her feet and said, by a vote of 13-7, the council, with the full backing of the daimyo of Hai no Kuni, do hereby banish Genin Uzumaki Naruto. He is to be outside the walls of Konohagakure no Sato within the next 72 hours, or he will be considered a threat to the village and executed as one. With this vote, the business of the council is finished for the day, and are excused. Danzo said as he rose himself. The civilian side of the council, along with Hiyashi and the 2 minor clans, all rose as one, a feeling of pride swelling in their chests from ridding the village of Konohagakure of the Kyuubi child. As they marched out, Kohaku, Homura, and Danzo sent the Godem Hokage a smug look that clearly sent the message, we run things around here now, before exiting themselves. I am sorry for this, Hokage-sama. Uzumaki Naruto was a loyal nin of Konoha, and it is a shame to lose one so loyal for a traitor. Shibi said as he rose to his feet. Similar sentiments were given by the Ino Shika Cho trio and the minor clan head before they exited, leaving Tsunade and Sume alone. Looking to the despondent Tsunade, Sume sighed as she said, I'm sorry for this, Hokage-sama. I must say that I've grown rather fond of the blonde pup, and the tale of how he defeated Kiba in the prelims of the Chunin exam caused me to damn near wet myself with laughter. Looking to the table, Sume asked, what are you going to do about him? After several moments of silence from their leader, Sume turned to ask what was wrong, but stopped as she saw the look on the blonde Hokage's face. It was similar to the one the Sandame used to get when he was planning to be devious, especially when he knew it would twist the panties of people who thought they'd gotten one over on him. A shiver shot up the Inuzuka head's spine, and she had a feeling that whatever was about to happen would shake the village to the core. Sume, yes Hokage-sama? Are you pondering what I'm pondering? Sume slowly matched the woman's smile, and said, I believe so, Hokage-sama. And if I indeed am, then all I can say is, I want in. Looking at the Inuzuka head, Tsunade's smile grew as she said, good, Sume-chan. Now, all we need is Shizune, and our plan can begin. Once again the shiver shot up her spine, and somehow Sume knew that this was going to be something that will be remembered for generations to come. In a clean white hospital room, Naruto laid on his belly wrapped in bandages, arms splayed over the bed's railings as he snored softly, drool pooling beside his face. Blankets laid on the floor at the foot of the bed, kicked there during the night while the blonde twisted and turned to get comfortable. Next to the bed stood Sakura, who looked rather uncomfortable at the state her friend was in. "Naruto," Sakura said softly, gently prodding his shoulder. In response, the blonde grumbled something in gibberish and waved his arm weakly in an attempt to get her to leave. "Naruto." Sakura spoke slightly louder with a more firm prod, her former discomfort being replaced by annoyance with Naruto's obvious deep sleep. A more annoyed grumble of gibberish, and another wave of his arm was his response. "Naruto," Sakura said and jabbed his shoulder, her discomfort all but replaced by annoyance now. And in response the blonde grumbled the barely intelligible, "Nah, Kura-chan, seep in." "Act, Ater." As his arm waved again, Sakura sighed and gently patted Naruto's bandaged head, her frown finding itself replaced by a soft smile as she said, "Alright then. I'll go see if Sasuke-kun is up to having visitors yet." Turning to leave Naruto to his well-deserved sleep, she looked back at his prone form and said, "By the way. Thank you, Naruto." Leaving the room, she sighed as she leaned back on the door and thought, what's this feeling in my stomach? It kind of feels like what I feel for Sasuke-kun, but not quite. Maybe it's gratitude to Naruto for bringing back Sasuke-kun. Or maybe it's what you would feel for a brother. Yeah, that's it. Or maybe it's because you want to go back there and ride that white blonde like you stole him, came the unwanted opinion of inner Sakura, causing the pinkette's eyes to widen in shock. A bright blush adorning her cheeks as she quickly thought, shut up. It's not that at all. He's a dear friend and nothing else. Yeah, you keep telling yourself that, but we both know the truth. You're tired of the cold, distant disdain of the Uchiha and want a man who'll make you feel like a lady. Like the previously mentioned white blonde. Sasuke's not like that. Sakura began, but the voice broke in and said, I know. He's actually a kind, caring person under that tough exterior. I'm beginning to doubt that even Tsunade-sama's strength could break through that exterior, if it is just an exterior. You keep chasing him like a beaten puppy looking for table scraps. Meanwhile you've got a 7-course meal of a blonde who all but worships you. And if you're not careful, he's gonna get snapped up by someone else, like maybe Hinata. You know, from what we've seen during our trips to the hot springs, Hinata's not bad looking. Why even? I bet we could really make her squirm. Began inner Sakura, but the pinkette's eyes widened in horror as she thought, no way. I am not that way. She purposely ignored the disagreement from her inner self as she quickly walked away from Naruto's room. She was so deep in her own thoughts that she almost crashed into someone walking down the hall. Excuse me, Sakura muttered, and a soft voice replied, It's okay, Sakura-san. Hinata? What are you doing here? Sakura asked as she looked to the other person, and saw the familiar form of the midnight-haired Hyuga heiress, holding a vase of flowers close to her chest. Her argument with her inner self came to the forefront of her mind, and she felt a light blush adorn her cheeks. I was visiting Kiba-kun, Neji-ni-san, Shikamaru-san, and Choji-san. IWW was just coming to see Naruto-kun. She replied softly, stuttering heavily as she told the blonde's teammate her last stop. Oh, Sakura said, adding, he's asleep right now. That's okay. I wasn't going to be long anyways. Hinata replied, and Sakura noticed the vase of flowers in the Hyuga's arms, and a delicate eyebrow rose as she asked, are those for Naruto? This simple question caused Hinata's face to turn a dark red as she nodded, looking down at the tiled floor. Giving the midnight-haired girl a reassuring smile, the pinkette said, I'm sure you'll love them. Hinata merely gave another small nod and continued down the hall toward Naruto's room. Turning to watch the girl walk down the hallway, Sakura's green eyes found their way to her shapely backside. Realizing where she was looking, Sakura quickly turned, her face a deep shade of red, gritting her teeth, arms crossed over her chest. What the hell was that? Sakura thought, shaking her head to get the image of Hinata's backside out of her mind, and in the back of her mind she heard her inner self smugly say, told ya so. Shut up, forehead, there you are, I've been looking everywhere for you. Turning, Sakura blinked at the distraught look on her friend's face as the light blonde stopped before her, eyebrows rising as she asked, why have you been looking for me, Ino pig? You mean you haven't heard? Ino asked, and Sakura shook her head. Frowning, Ino said, well, my dad came home from a meeting this morning, and he told me the council's made some decisions. About Sasuke-kun? Sakura asked, and Ino nodded as she said, about him and Naruto. Naruto? Why would the council care about him? The pinkhead asked, and Ino replied, I don't know. But they apparently decided to banish him from Konoha. What? Sakura cried, forgetting Sasuke for the moment as Ino said, yeah. Dad won't tell me why, but he was upset about it. But Tsunade-sama. Sakura muttered, and Ino merely gave a hopeless shrug in reply. I need to go see Tsunade-sama. Sakura decided, turning and running down the hallway as Ino sighed and looked to the ceiling, wondering, what's so important about the dobi anyways? Gently shutting the door behind her, Hinata looked to the sleeping blonde, a light blush accompanying the gentle smile on her face at how bonelessly comfortable he managed to look sleeping in spite of his uncomfortable-looking position. Walking to the bed, she carefully placed the vase of flowers on his bedside table and sighed, turning to leave the room and let the blonde sleep. Nada-chan, came the sleep-laden voice of the blonde, causing the Hyuga heiress to stop, her face darkening as she turned and bowed low, murmuring, so sorry for waking you, Naruto-kun. S'alright, Naruto replied sleepily as he rolled over and sat up, rubbing an eye childishly with a jaw-cracking yawn. Blinking his eyes owlishly, he looked at Hinata and asked, was Sakura-chan here? I could have sworn I heard her talking to me. She was, but you were sleeping. Hinata murmured, and Naruto nodded as he said, okay. Looking around the room, the blonde took sight of a chair and waved to it with a bandaged arm as he said, pull up a chair and talk to me for a while, Hinata. I'd get the chair myself, but, well. Baon gets mad when I get out of bed. No, it's okay. The pale-eyed girl murmured, grabbing a chair and pulling it close, the legs scraping against the linoleum as she did so. Taking a seat, she looked to her hands, where her index fingers were pressing against one another, and Naruto looked around his room, taking in the unadorned white walls as he tried to ignore the smell of antiseptic permeating the air. Noticing the flowers on the bedside table, Naruto asked, so, did you bring the flowers? Why yes. Hinata replied, and the blonde gave her a smile as he said, thanks a lot Hinata-chan, they're nice. And it gives me something pretty to look at. You're welcome. Hinata managed, not daring to look up at him, lest he see her embarrassing blush. Instead, she carefully studied her index fingers as they pressed together. So, wanna get some ramen together later? Naruto asked, and Hinata actually looked up, studying his bandaged body as she asked, but didn't you saw say Tsunade-sama wa wants you to Santa stay? All those bandages. Waving off her concern, Naruto grinned and said, nah. I was good enough to go home yesterday, but Tsunade-ban just wanted me to stay overnight for observation. I personally think she finds it funny to force me to lay in this bed, counting the holes in the ceiling. And the bandages are, well, I don't know why I'm still bandaged. Probably just overreaction, since I've never been this wrapped up before. Oh, Hinata murmured, a small smile crossing her face as she continued, okay. Okay what? Naruto asked, and Hinata replied, going for raw ramen later. Cool. Naruto replied with a wide smile to the girl, which slowly drooped into a frown, his eyes shining with concern as he asked, so, are the others, alright? She gave him a smile that allowed him a relieved sigh as she answered, yes. Ne Neji ni san and ch Choji san we were in bad shape, but Tsunade-sama saved them. Good old Baon, she can do anything. Naruto stated with confidence, and the pale-eyed girl gave an affirmative nod as she said, hi. And I was awesome on the mission. I mean, Choji, Neji, Shikamaru, and Neji were good, but I was great. Naruto said with a wide grin, chest puffed out with pride. Giggling into her hand, Hinata found the sight before her too adorable for words. How about I tell you about my awesomeness while we wait for Ba-chan to come release me? Naruto asked, still smiling softly. The eldest daughter of Hyuga Hiyashi nodded softly, awaiting the tale of bravery and selflessness with her handsome Naruto-kun as the dashing hero. Hitaki Kakashi scowled beneath his mask as he stood inside Sasuke's hospital room, watching the second-to-last Uchiha lay silent and still, under a forced sleep jutsu lest he make another escape attempt, or some such nonsense. Kakashi stared at the boy he had come to care for like a son, the boy he gave everything to, and yet it wasn't enough. For a moment, and only a moment, he wondered if it was his fault. But he quickly shook his head, ridding his mind of those traitorous thoughts. He knew it wasn't his fault. It wasn't Sasuke's fault either. There was only one person at fault for his attempt to go missing Nen. And that was the Uchiha's teammate, Uzumaki Naruto. Each member of Team 7 had a very important and critical role in their cell. Sasuke was supposed to be the prodigy, Kakashi's crowning achievement as a teacher, something the Uchiha was living up to. Sakura was supposed to be Sasuke's cheerleader, keeping his spirits up and lavishing the Uchiha with praise, a position she was going above and beyond to do. And Naruto was supposed to be Sasuke's rival, without actually rivaling him. He was supposed to be the Uchiha's own punching bag, always weak, never equaling, or heaven forbid, surpassing the Sharingan user. But in spite of all his attempts to undermine the Jinchuriki's training, to keep him weak, he somehow managed to overcome those obstacles. Never training the blonde, making sure he did nothing but D ranks, he did his best. Even after he somehow made it past the Chunin exam prelims, he still managed to put a large roadblock before the blonde. He convinced Ebisu, a man who supposedly hated the blonde, to train him. In actuality, Ebisu was supposed to only have him work on chakra training, not actually teach him anything. But then the blonde somehow managed to bump into Jiraiya and convince the Sannin to train him. And train him the man did, to the point the blonde actually managed to outshine Sasuke during the invasion, even defeating his fellow Jinchuriki Gaara. If that weren't enough, the old pervert actually taught the blonde the Rasengan, a technique created by his sensei Minato. When he found out, he'd been enraged, knowing the Rasengan to be equal to his own Chidori, meaning that the blonde was equal to Sasuke. Now the blonde had a victory over Sasuke, meaning that his son was defeated by his rival. Kakashi's blood boiled at the very thought that he'd managed to fail not only Sasuke, but also Obito and the memory of his fellow Uchihas. And furthermore, that bitch of a Hokage had stripped Sasuke of his shinobi rank, resigning the last Uchiha, his son, to the existence of a civilian. How dare she? Reaching out, he gently stroked Sasuke's hair as he said, "Don't worry, Sasuke. The council will fix this, and I'll be training you again soon." Shizune looked up from the rolled-up scroll that held several official orders from the Godem Hokage and looked to the buxom blonde with concern as she asked, "Are you sure this is a good idea, Tsunade-sama? I mean, won't this enrage the council and village elders?" A bark of a laugh sounded from the third woman in the room as Sume answered, "Of course it's going to enrage them. That's the entire point. They're trying to push the Hokage around and bring her to heel like she's their show bitch, and using the pup as a show of power. This is merely to show those bastards that Tsunade isn't just Hokage, she's the alpha and they're subordinate to her, not the other way around. You fuck with her, and she'll prove her alpha status. Couldn't have put it better myself, Sume," Tsunade said with a smile. "I live to serve the alpha of my pack even if no one else will, Hokage-sama." Sume said as she leaned back in her seat, Shizune sighing as she said, "I wish I could be so confident, Tsunade-sama." "Don't worry about it, Shizune. If it gets too bad, you can claim ignorance and following the orders of your leader. People have been forgiven of worse crimes under that excuse," Tsunade said as she patted the youngest of the trio comfortingly on the arm. "I know. I just wish there was another way," Shizune replied, and Tsunade answered, "I do too. But those bastards were smart, believing they've won one over me. They know I care for the blonde, and see banishing Naruto from Konoha as a sign of their power over me, possibly bringing me to heel as their own figurehead in a puppet government. And it might have worked, too. Except they forgot one thing." "And what is that?" Shizune asked, and Tsunade's smile grew wider as she said, "That I'm not afraid to pack up and leave their bullshit politicking in the dust. If they want to play these games, then we'll play their games. But I ain't going to play personally." Picking up the scroll, she waved it and said, "I'm bringing in a ringer, a master manipulator, someone who's spent the better part of a decade doing this stuff on a scale those fools can't comprehend. If he'll do it," Sume said, and Tsunade replied, "He'll do it. Trust me, that man can be as petty and vindictive as me when angered." And this scroll is going to let him put that twisted mind to good use in repaying 13 years of social isolation and emotional abuse. Their conversation was interrupted by the intercom crackling to life, and the voice of her secretary speaking through it, "Excuse me, Godem-sama. But there is a genin by the name of Haruno Sakura here wishing to speak with you, and she seems rather upset. Probably about the traitorous whelp, no doubt." Tsume muttered, and Tsunade said, "Might as well hear her out. Maybe we can get something out of her." Pushing the send button, Tsunade replied, "Send her in." After a few moments, the door swung open, and a disheveled, bleary-eyed Sakura entered, seemingly ignoring the Inuzuka head in Shizune as she walked up to the desk, turning bleary green eyes filled with fear as she asked, "Is it true?" "Is what true?" Tsunade questioned, and Sakura replied, that you're Bob banishing Naruto." "It's not true, is it?" Sighing, she said, "No, I am not banishing Naruto." Seeing the relief in the girl's eyes, Tsunade felt like a horrible person as she continued, "But unfortunately, the Council of Konoha voted 13-7 for his banishment, a decision being endorsed by the daimyo. There's nothing I can do about it, my hands are tied." At hearing this news, Sakura's legs felt weak, as if they'd been injected with a powerful sedative. Her knees shook and buckled, causing her to drop to a kneeling position on the floor, silent tears flowing down her cheeks as she balled her fists on her knees. Feeling the sadness practically radiating off the girl, Tsume looked to the blonde Hokage, her eyes sending a silent message. Getting an affirmative nod from their leader, Tsume looked to the pinkhead, gave a reassuring smile as she said, "Don't worry. Tsunade-sama isn't just going to throw the pup out into the world. She's planning how best to aid him, okay?" Green eyes shining with tears turned to the Hokage, and after wiping her face off with her hands, Sakura smiled sadly as she said, Thank you, Hokage-sama." Returning the smile with one of her own, Tsunade studied the girl kneeling before her, a curiosity piqued. Raising a delicate eyebrow, the buxom blonde asked, "What exactly is your relationship with Genin Uzumaki Naruto?" Naruto?" Sakura asked, a blush crossing her cheeks, and receiving a nod, the girl looked to the floor and answered softly, I don't know. He can be a real baka sometimes, he's still a close friend. But lately I've been getting this feeling in my stomach. It's kind of what I feel for Sasuke-kun, and yet different. I can't really describe it, but it feels weird, and nice. Warm, I see, Tsunade said, the smile disappearing for the neutral face of a leader, chocolate-colored eyes focusing on the pink-haired genin as she said, "Genin Haruno Sakura." Yes Hokage-sama?" Sakura asked as his head snapped up, green eyes meeting brown as the blonde Hokage questioned, "Would you be willing to aid me in concern to Uzumaki Naruto? Doing so would leave you within my debt, and I would be willing to make you my apprentice should you accept." A conflict of emotions filled green eyes, elation, confusion, and a little bit of worry chief among them. After a minute of silence, the Hokage said, "Don't answer me now. You may go home and think it over, just return here early tomorrow with your answer. But I want you to know that what I'm going to ask of you is difficult, so don't make this decision lightly." A silent nod was her answer, and Tsunade smiled as she said, "Good girl. Also, do you know anyone else willing to aid Naruto?" Without a moment of hesitation, Sakura answered, "Hyuga Hinata." "The Hyuga heiress?" Shizune asked, and receiving a nod from the pinkhead, Tsume grinned and added, "Kiba's commented on her constantly sniffing around the blonde pup. Unfortunately she's too shy to tell him her feelings, and he's too dense to notice her affections." "Thank you Sakura-san," Tsunade said, and as the girl stood to leave, Shizune asked, "Before you go Sakura, may I ask how you found out about his banishment?" The pinkette let out a sigh as she replied, "Ino told me. She said she'd heard it from her father, and he was angry about it. I had to find out for sure." "Very well. Dismissed," Tsunade said, and giving a small nod, the girl exited the room, looking emotionally drained by the events that took place in this office. "It seems we've got some untapped resources in Konoha waiting to be used," Tsunade said after the genin left, and turned to Shizune as she said, "Please bring Hyuga Hinata here as soon as possible." Then Sasuke, overtaken by that curse seal he was given by Habi Teme, leapt at me with his Chidori, so I engaged him, countering with my Rasengan. The attacks were evenly matched, and were struggling for dominance between us. Naruto said, hands clasped before him and, struggling. Hinata giggled softly at the look of intense concentration on the blonde's face as he seemed totally committed to not only telling his lone audience member the tale, but pantomiming it properly so she wasn't bored. It looked bad for me, but the Teme didn't notice the clone I created earlier suddenly leap at him from behind, and take hold of his monster wings and pull them back. Naruto mimicked wrapping his arms around the base of the hand like wings and pulling back hard. This, of course, had the effect of distracting him, if only a bit. And since he needed his full concentration to battle my Rasengan, that small break in it was all I needed. My Rasengan pushed through, breaking the Chidori and striking him in the chest. I pulled back slightly of course, since I didn't want to kill him, but what I hit him with was enough to send him flying into the valley wall, then hit the ground unconscious. Naruto, miming pushing through some defense, threw himself back onto his bed, arms flailing. Unfortunately, that battle was tough, so it was all I could do not to pass out until I was safely back on the ground. But I passed out happy, because I was victor. Then I woke up in the hospital with Ba-chan and Tsunade-chan fretting over me. And that is the tale of how I managed to bring back Sasuke. Naruto finished with his brilliant smile, Hinata clapping his exile rating tail. That was very exciting, na Naruto-kun. Hinata murmured, and the blonde rubbed the back of his head sheepishly as he said, thanks Hinata-chan. A knock sounded at the door, and it opened as Shizune walked in with a strained smile to the blonde, who returned the smile as he said, hey Shizune-chan. What you doing here? I was looking for Hinata because Tsunade-sama wishes to speak with her, and figured she was visiting you. Shizune said with a smile, and Hinata asked, why does Hokage-sama wish to see me? You'll just have to go see her and find out yourself. Shizune said with a teasing tone, and Hinata nodded, turning to Naruto as she said, bye na Naruto-kun. Bye Hinata-chan. Naruto said with a wave, and as the Hyuga heiress left, Naruto turned to Tsunade's apprentice as he asked, can I leave now, Ne-chan? Sure, just let me give you a final checkup to make sure you're as well as you appear to be. Shizune replied, and watched the blonde whoop with joy at finally being able to leave the hospital. Okay, strip. Shizune commanded, and her smile grew as she mentally counted down until the eventual sudden stop of the Naruto dance of joy. The blonde whirled on her with a speed rarely seen outside of those not clad in green spandex, eyes wide and jaw hanging. What? Shizune covered her mouth with a hand to hide her giggle as she said, this is going to be a complete checkup Naruto. That means you have to lose all your clothes so I can do it properly. The blonde's jaw snapped shut, his face turning a shade of red that would put tomatoes to shame, and backed away, pointing at her and cried, Ero Ne-chan. Shizune had to fight hard not to burst into laughter as she said, well, if you feel that way, I could get Anko to do it. Of course, I need to get you to sign a few forms first. For what? Naruto asked, and Shizune answered, boring legal stuff mostly. They're only to ensure that I and the hospital are absolved of any legal consequences for what might happen during the medical exam. Why? What could happen? Naruto questioned, and Shizune replied, when Anko gets those clothes off you, she'll get to see that little body of yours and, more importantly, your third leg, down there. After which I'm afraid she won't be able to control herself and she'll make a man out of you. The look of confusion on Naruto's face was adorable, but the look of horrified realization, followed quickly by hands covering his crotch, caused the dark-haired woman to nearly break down in a fit of laughter. Her threat received the proper response of the blonde quickly relieving himself of his hospital-provided pajamas, standing with only his hands guarding his third leg from view. Motioning to the bed with a hand, Shizune said, take a seat so we can begin. The blonde, so intent on keeping his front covered, turned his back to Shizune, and with a wicked smile the dark-haired woman replied, that's a cute little butt you've got there Naruto-kun. Shizune burst into a fit of laughter at the sight of Naruto nearly jumping out of his skin with a yelp before disappearing beneath the sheets of the bed, a scandalized cry of, Ero Ne-chan, after he was saved beneath the nudity obscuring sheets. Hinata stood before the Hokage's office door, fingers tapping together. As she stood there, she was forced to wonder why the Hokage would ever want to see the failure of the Hyuga clan. Looking to the secretary seated beside the door, the woman gave her a comforting smile before returning to work. After what felt like an eternity to the lavender-eyed girl, the intercom buzzed to life and Tsunade could be heard to say, "Send her in." The secretary motioned to the door, and giving her an appreciative nod, Hinata walked to the door and took hold of the handle. Several comforting breaths allowed her to open the door and enter, allowing her to see Inuzuka Sume and the buxom Hokage watching her expectantly. "Take a seat, Hinata-chan," Tsunade said, motioning to the chair before her, and the young girl cautiously did so, not looking up at the powerful Kunoichi with her. "Hinata-chan, from what I've heard, you care very deeply for the genin Uzumaki Naruto. Is that correct?" Tsunade asked, and gulping, the young heiress nodded. Pleading eyes turned to the blonde before her. "Is there something wrong, Hinata-chan?" Tsunade asked, and Hinata murmured softly, Please please don't inform my father. He would be displeased by this. Don't worry, Hinata, what's spoken in this room will never reach the ears of Hiyashi, I promise." Sume said, and Hinata turned to Sume with a look that one would expect from a prisoner of war who was just told that he was going home. Not a girl embarrassed at the thought of her father learning of her crush. Tsunade frowned at the reaction, but pushed it away for another time, knowing they had more important things to discuss now. "Hinata, I have some news to inform you concerning Naruto." Tsunade continued, and the girl looked horrified as she asked, "He's not going to die, is he?" Smiling to the frightened girl, Tsunade answered, "No, he's not going to die, at least not for a very long time." However, her smile disappeared as she continued, "Unfortunately, the council has decided in their infinite wisdom decided that he needed to be banished, a sentence backed by the daimyo of Hai no Kuni. Unfortunately, there's nothing I can do." She watched as the already pale girl lost what little color her face held, looking as though she had been sentenced to death as she turned to Tsunade and said, "Mifa father VV voted F for his banishment." There wasn't a hint of a question, just a statement of fact, one which Tsunade nodded to. A slight smile returned to the Hokage's face as she said, "I have a plan to aid Naruto in this criminal abuse of power by the council, and I need your help. Let me warn you, what I'm going to ask of you is difficult, and will require much from you, but I have full faith in your ability to help me. Also know that if you agree to do this for me, I will be in your debt and I would make you my apprentice." Sitting in silence for several long moments, Hinata looked to the female Hokage and asked, "What do you need of me? This has nothing to do with debt or the apprenticeship, does it?" Sume asked, though it wasn't a question. Seeing the midnight-haired girl nod, Sume smiled as Tsunade said, "Return here tomorrow morning to learn of your mission." Watching the pale-eyed girl leave, Tsunade turned to the last person in the room and asked, "Now, I've been curious about this since yesterday, and I must know. Why are you doing this?" "Doing what?" Sume asked, and Tsunade replied, "Don't play dumb with me. Why are you doing so much to aid me in concerns to Uzumaki Naruto? I know you said you were fond of him and he makes you laugh, but that doesn't cause someone to do so much for a person. Now spill the truth." Sume looked into the Hokage's eyes as she said, "I find the elder's actions inexcusable, and I happen to see the boy as one of my own pups." Smirking, Tsunade said, "You're lying, at least partially." Tensing, the Inuzuka matriarch asked, "What do you mean? The fact you find the elder's actions inexcusable is true, but you seeing the boy as one of your own children is a lie." Tsunade said, and Sume asked, "How did you? Your ability to hide the fact you're lying is incredible, but there were just enough tells for me to see through it. And had I not been a medic nin most of my life, even I might have missed them. Now tell me the truth." Tsunade answered, and Sume looked at her leader silently, studying the woman and sizing her up. Finally, she slumped back in her chair with a sigh as she said, "Okay. The honest to Kami truth is that, damn it, I have a crush on the blonde pup." "You have a crush on Naruto?" Tsunade asked, and Sume nodded, covering her eyes with the base of her palms as she said, I know. I'm more than twice the pup's age. I have a son his age for Kami's sake. But ever since the Chunin exam finals, whenever I think about him, I. You swoon like a silly fangirl, your heart beats like you're in a life or death struggle, and you feel as if everything would be alright if only he could return those feelings." Tsunade explained, and Sume nodded, at least before realization hit her and she looked to the Hokage with a questioning glance. "How do I know?" "Well, join the club, sister." I felt the same way about a genin years ago. Tsunade said, and Sume asked, who? A young genin under the tutelage of my pervert of a friend Jiraiya, and his head currently watches over Konoha from the monument outside. Tsunade explained, and Sume looked stunned as she muttered, Yondaime-sama. Yep, but at the time, he was a blonde-haired, blue-eyed brat of a genin named Namikaze Minato, not the most feared shinobi to ever step on a battlefield. Reminds me of Naruto in a lot of ways, actually. Tsunade said, eyes taking a faraway quality as she thought of the blonde young blonde. It's sick, isn't it? Sume asked, and Tsunade shook her head as she said, not at all. But he's 13. Sume began, but Tsunade replied, and he's a shinobi of Konohagakure. The moment he placed that Hite-8 on his forehead, he became an adult. He has been deemed mature enough to kill for his village, so he's mature enough to smoke, to drink, and to be in a relationship with a man or woman of any age without consequence. It still feels wrong. Sume muttered, and Tsunade replied, I understand. But if anyone is mature enough to handle a relationship, it's him. Blinking, Sume asked, have you met the pup? Of course. But that is his personality, a result of social isolation and his attempts to receive any attention from people trying to deny his very existence. According to records, he has lived on his own since the age of 6, and to not only survive, but thrive like that requires a level of maturity not seen in many adults. Tsunade explained, and Sume eyed the Hokage as she said, you sure are striving hard to bring this about, Tsunade-sama. Leaning on her desk, Tsunade sighed as she said honestly, that blonde brat has undeservedly suffered a lot in his short life. Far too much, in my opinion. After what he's been through, he deserves to be happy, and more importantly, loved. But Hinata, Sume began. Tsunade however stopped her as she said, I'm not saying he has to love only one person. Far from it, actually. He has shown a surprising amount of compassion for those around him, and if anyone can love more than one woman, it's him. In fact, I'm certain he can. Chocolate eyes locked with slitted pupils as Tsunade said, just don't close off a chance at finding love again so quickly. Please. Sume stared into brown eyes filled with pain and long-lost chances, and heard the need to help her avoid the horrible fate of being lonely, bitter, and trying to find comfort in vices, one the blonde suffered for so long before being saved by Naruto. Sighing, Sume nodded and said, I won't, Hokage-sama. Sitting back, relief shone in Tsunade's eyes as she said, that's all I ask, Sume. Naruto glared at the smirking Shizune as he finished strapping on his sandals with a mutter of, Ero ne-chan. What she'd done to him was embarrassing, and felt more like something that belonged in Ero Sennin's novels instead of being performed by a medic, especially his ne-chan. Alright Naruto, you're in perfect health. Shizune said, and Naruto scoffed as he stood, saying, I could have told you that. Now Naruto-kun, don't be like that. I and Tsunade-sama just want to make sure you're okay. In spite of how she sometimes acts, Tsunade-sama worries about you as much as I do. Shizune said. Hearing that, the blonde's anger left and he deflated as he muttered, sorry ne-chan. It's alright, Naruto-kun. Now get out of here, this hospital room is needed for sick and injured people. Shizune said, and Naruto beamed at her before suddenly giving her a tight hug. Watching the blonde dash from the room, Shizune felt her cheeks darken as a smile crossed her face. She had a bet with Anko to win. Practically exploding out of the hospital doors and into the bright sunny day, Naruto turned in a small circle, arms spread wide, face skyward, and eyes closed as he soaked up the comforting warmth of the sun. The cool breeze brought the blonde a symphony of different scents filling Konoha, which was practically heaven for the blonde's nose after the stale sterility of the hospital. Taking a deep breath, Naruto sighed contently as he walked toward his home away from home within the walls of Konoha, the humble shrine dedicated to worship of the greatest of all foods, one given by Kami herself to prove that people were indeed loved. Ichiraku's ramen shop. Naruto found an extra skip in his step at finally being out of the hospital, free to eat his beloved ramen and not worry about Tsunade and Shizune practically smothering him. But, even though he would never admit it to them even on pain of death, he found he enjoyed their concern about his safety. When they were fretting over whether or not he took his painkillers, if his blankets were fresh, and that he ate the nasty hospital food, he wondered if that was what it felt like to have a mother or sister. If Iruka was his father, Sarutobi one of his grandfathers, with Tuchi being the other, Ayame his sister, and Sasuke his brother, then Tsunade was his mother, and Shizune another sister. Allowing himself to believe that they really were his family allowed him to stave off the crushing depression of loneliness that filled the majority of his life, if only for a few precious moments. Shaking his head to remove such thoughts, Naruto thought of the ramen he was about to enjoy. He had to make up for precious lost meals of ramen, and had a story to tell Ichiraku and Ayame. One even more exciting than Team 7's mission to Wave. As he walked, he smiled to the people around him, purposefully ignoring the hidden glares and looks of disgust from the people around him. Naruto? The blonde stopped and turned to see Ino standing there, watching him carefully. Giving the pale blonde a bright smile, Naruto said, "Hey Ino-chan, I was just going to get me some ramen to wash away the nasty taste of hospital food. Want to come with me?" The pale blonde stood silent for a few moments before giving a weak smile as she said, "Sure." Walking side by side with Naruto, Ino wondered why the blonde was taking his banishment so well when it suddenly hit her. He didn't know. Here he was, in blissful ignorance of his fate, something he didn't deserve. In fact, it was seen by most shinobi as the blonde being rewarded for completing a mission successfully with a punch in the stomach and kick to the jewels. Sighing, Ino knew someone had to tell him, but found she didn't have it in her heart to emotionally destroy him by doing so. "Ino-chan?" Ino blinked several times before turning to face him, concern on his face as he asked, "Are you okay? You kind of spaced out there for a moment. Maybe you should go see Tsunade Ba-chan and make sure you're okay." Waving off his concern with a smile, Ino said, "I'm fine, I was just lost in thought for a moment." "So, how did your mission go?" At her question, Naruto gave her one of his brilliant smiles and excitedly began his tale. Ino found his excitement contagious, and was drawn in by the emotions expressed by the blonde during his retelling. She gasped when necessary, laughed at happy moments, frowned at the beginning of his confrontation with Sasuke, and cheered when he told of his courageous defeat of the curse seal-infected Sasuke. By the end of his tale, he found himself standing outside of the ramen stand, and realized they'd been standing outside it for several minutes, neither entering, Ino enthralled by the story, and Naruto engaged in telling it. Smiling, Naruto moved one of the flaps with a grin and said, "Ladies first." Laughing slightly, Ino replied, "Flattery will get you everywhere, Naruto." As she walked past, she swayed her hips in a way normally reserved for Sasuke. And she noted with pleasure that unlike Sasuke, Naruto quite obviously took notice, his eyes watching her firm, round backside as she walked. The blonde caught himself. Naruto closed his eyes, a deep blush on his cheeks as he thought, "I am not a pervert. I am not a pervert." But even as he thought that, images of Ino's swaying backside forced themselves to the forefront of his mind, followed by similar images of Sakura's and Hinata's equally round bottoms. The sound of Ino asking, "Naruto, you okay?" brought the blonde out of his thoughts, and he nodded quickly, face flush with embarrassment as he practically ran into the stand, hoping that his thoughts weren't being made obvious by his third leg rising to attention. Taking his seat next to the ponytailed blonde, Naruto ordered 3 bowls of ramen, pork, beef, and miso, while Ino ordered vegetable ramen. Watching the bright blonde-haired shinobi next to her tap his fingers on the bar of the stand impatiently as he awaited his ramen, Ino sighed softly as she realized that the blonde would be destroyed by his banishment. She had to do something, anything to soften the blow, if only a little. And like a flash of lightning, it struck her. Leaning over to him, she placed her hand on his opposite cheek and suddenly pulled him close, planting a kiss on his cheek. Watching his face darken considerably, Ino whispered, "Don't forget Naruto, many people in Konoha care about you." Stunned by the kiss, Naruto stared at her, nodding dumbly as he muttered, "Oh okay. Whatever you say." Smiling, Ino said, "Good," and turned to the ramen being placed before her by a smirking Ayame. Naruto numbly doing the same, unsure of what had caused that. Little did he realize that he'd find out all too soon. And that doing so would change not only his life, but the lives of many within Konoha and even the village itself. Hinata sat on the park bench, staring deep into the cup of tea cooling in her hands. She couldn't return home after reporting to the Hokage's office, at least not until she managed to sort through her thoughts and feelings. The need to do so was important, for if her father had any reason to suspect her of knowing something he didn't, he would interrogate her and she would be forced to tell him everything. This would most likely get her branded with the caged bird seal, and worse, cause trouble for Tsunade-sama and Naruto-kun. All because she was too weak to stand up to her father. Sighing, she sipped the tea, closing her eyes as the lukewarm liquid calmed her nerves, allowing her to get them under control. For the sake of the Hokage's plan and Naruto's safety, she needed to do so. Why does everyone seem hate you so, Naruto-kun? Hinata wondered as she took another sip of her tea. Watching her beloved blonde from afar for so many years, she had seen the way people would glare hatefully at him, if they gave him any attention at all. And the fact she was so unnoticeable she could disappear in a crowd allowed her to listen in on whispered conversations about the blonde, and none of them were favorable. So many questions surrounded the whisker-cheeked blonde, but she had always been afraid to seek the answers, fearing retribution for digging into such things, even from the grandfatherly Sarutobi. But now, she felt she could ask Tsunade and not have to worry about punishment. Taking another sip of her tea, a new thought came to her mind, one that made her smile. Not everyone hated her blonde crush, and she'd seen this the same as she'd seen the hatred of many. Jiraiya-sama, Tsunade-sama, Shizune-san, Sume-sama, Tuchi and his daughter Ayame, Iruka-sensei, and Sakura all liked the blonde. Shikamaru and Choji were neutral to him, and her own teammates seemed to hold a sense of camaraderie with him. A blush overtook her cheeks as she remembered Kiba's friendly teasing about her crush while subtly encouraging it, and even Shino-kun occasionally spoke of him favorably, though his statements were sometimes odd. And to be honest, she couldn't tell if he was actually making a joke or not. She wasn't alone in that aspect, for Kiba-kun or Kurenai-sensei couldn't tell either. Draining her cup of its lukewarm contents, she looked at the tea leaves resting at the bottom. Her mother believed that one could tell the future from reading tea leaves, but her father dismissed it as superstitious nonsense. Even so, her mother knew how to do so and had begun to teach Hinata. But all she was able to learn from her mother was if the omen in the leaves meant good or ill. Staring at them for several long moments, a small smile crossed her face. The leaves resting at the bottom of her teacup meant good omens were going to come to her. And hopefully Naruto would share those good omens by association. Holding onto the cup, she stood from her seat and headed for home, assured of her ability not to arouse suspicion in her family before her meeting with the Hokage tomorrow morning. Ino sat behind the counter in her family's flower shop, flipping through a magazine. But she wasn't really reading it, instead, her mind was still on the banished blonde. Despite outward appearances, as a Yamanaka and a mindwalker, her mind was firmly rooted in both logic and understanding the workings of the human mind. She had to be at all proficient in her clan's jutsus, and if there was one thing she took seriously in her ninja training, it was those. And the council taking such an interest in the orphaned dead last of her class to the point of using the daimyo to banish him didn't make a bit of sense logically to her. Sure, he could be annoying, and he used to regularly play harmless pranks on the villagers, but he'd stopped his pranking ways after making genin, and being annoying wasn't reason enough to go through all the trouble they had to banish him. To make things more confusing, her father refused to tell her why the council had banished him, only making brief mention of some law or another as an excuse. This was all infuriatingly confusing to her, since she doubted enough of the council could illogically hate her fellow blonde to be able to banish him. Especially Hinata's dad, a man who she had seen to be a very cold, impersonal man with his family, and treated everyone else as something that should be scurrying under a rock. For him to take interest in anyone not of his clan, especially someone like Naruto, meant they were hiding something from not only her, but everyone in her generation and under. The sound of the door's bell sounded, followed by a rather subdued, "Ino?" Forced from her thoughts, Ino looked up to her former friend-turned-rival-turned-tentative friend Sakura, and at the morose look on the normally chipper Pinkette's face, knew the other was troubled. "What's the matter for, Sakura?" Ino asked, almost reverting to her nickname for the other. Sighing, Sakura walked to the counter and leaned on it, resting her head on her forearms as she muttered, "I need someone to talk to." "Well, I have consider me a sympathetic shoulder for your troubles, Sakura," Ino said, and the green eyes of her friend held both relief and enormous amounts of gratitude as the Pinkette said, "Thank you." "Now, what's troubling you?" Ino asked, leaning her elbows on the counter and holding her chin in her hands. Thinking it over, Sakura said, "It's about Naruto. I talked to Tsunade-sama, and they're really banishing him." Nodding, Ino waited for the girl to continue, seeing that wasn't her only trouble. "Tsunade-sama is going to help him, and she asked for my help." Sakura finished, and Ino asked, "What did you say?" "I haven't answered yet, and I have until tomorrow to do so, but I don't know if I can. I mean, to take it will get me a rare chance, and I'll be able to help Naruto. But there's my parents to think of, and. Sakura trailed off, and Ino nodded as she asked, "And Sasuke-kun?" "Yeah, I don't know what to think of him anymore. I offered him love, friendship, and everything I could, but he. Sakura replied, and Ino said, "He balled it up like so much trash and threw it back in your face. Not only that, he also tried to betray Konoha to one of our greatest enemies and almost murdered Naruto. His best friend, all because he was trying to keep him from making such a horrible mistake." Sakura said, the sheer magnitude of both actions seemingly beyond her reasoning. Ino nodded in agreement, knowing that even though they weren't exactly best friends anymore, the thought of one trying to kill the other sent a cold chill down their spine. "And then there's what Kakashi said." Kakashi said. Sakura said, and noting the way Sakura spoke Kakashi's name as if it were some vile venom, Ino asked, "What happened with him?" "Well, I went to speak to him about Naruto and Sasuke, but the bastard didn't even care that Naruto was being banished. In fact, he even seemed happy that one of his students was going to be exiled from Konoha, acting as if it were somehow Naruto's fault for Sasuke's actions and punishment." Sakura said, face flushed with anger, and Ino paled at the thought of a sensei acting that way. While a lazy, unmotivated bastard, Asuma did care about his students in his own unique way, and should anything like this happen to one of them, he would bring the wrath of Kami down on the heads of those responsible like an avenging, cigarette-smoking demon. "No," Ino muttered in disbelief, and Sakura nodded, her scowl deepening as she said, "Then there was the way he spoke of Tsunade-sama. And worse of all, his tone implied I would blindly agree with him because it involved Sasuke. Like I didn't expect Sasuke-kun to be punished in some way for almost defecting to Orochimaru. How shallow does he think I am? Sakura, you probably were that shallow once." Ino said, stressing the word once, and Sakura stared at the pale blonde in momentary disbelief before understanding flooded her. "Yeah, I was a shallow bitch, wasn't I?" Sakura asked, and Ino gave a single nod before smiling and saying, "But you're not anymore. You've grown and matured a lot during your shinobi career. All of us have, even Naruto. It's just too bad that your sensei has his head shoved too far up his own ass to see that." "Thanks," Sakura said with a grateful nod, and Ino looked to her friend as she asked, "What are you gonna do about Tsunade's offer?" I don't know," Sakura replied, and Ino said, "Well, whatever you decide to do, Sakura, just know that I and the rest of your friends will stand behind you all the way no matter what, same as Naruto." Looking up at her blonde friend, Sakura stared at her for several seconds before an impulsive thought overcame her. And before she had time to realize what she was doing, she did it. She leaned over the counter and gave Ino a brief kiss on the lips. Breaking from the blonde, the pinkette's eyes widened in shock, which was followed by those of her friend. The duo stared at each other for a few uncomfortable seconds before Sakura turned and bolted out the door, an embarrassed blush adorning her cheeks. Watching her friend leave out the door, Ino raised a hand to her lips, a mild pink dusting her own cheeks as she felt her still tingling lips, all new questions buzzing around in her head. Walking past the cadet branch guards with a small, polite nod, Hinata entered the Hyuga estates, head downturned, not really looking at those around her. It was all too normal for her, so no one who saw her thought too much of her posture, believing it to be the shame of being so weak and such a disgrace to the prestigious Hyuga clan weighing down her head. Her path was well worn by her feet, so she quickly found herself standing before her door without even really thinking about it. Entering the room, she activated the seals that protected her room from being spied into by the Byakugan. This was a luxury only afforded to the main branch, for which she was glad as she stopped beside her futon. Taking a deep breath, she carefully removed a couple of floorboards and looked into the secret compartment. In it were a variety of items, most of them sentimental in value, which necessitated their being hidden from her clan, whom hated such things with a passion, her father more than most. Those items included a couple of storybooks her mother read her when she was a child, pictures of her parents during happier times, her mother's pressed flower collection, and other such items. Also within the compartment was a wood box filled with various sugary sweets ferreted into her room in secret. She mostly kept it for when her father was so displeased with her as his daughter he forced her to bed without supper, an all too common occurrence for her. It was also for when she was feeling especially down and needed a little pick-me-up, another all too common occurrence. The one of only things in her hidey hole was a picture of her Naruto-kun, standing in one of the training grounds, giving the camera one of his face-splitting smiles and a thumbs up. His jacket was off, leaving him only in a black t-shirt, and a thin sheen of sweat resided on his body from the obviously strenuous workout he'd just gone through. Looking at the picture caused her to blush, but also made her remember why she cared for the blonde so deeply. Despite his faults, he was a dedicated worker, friendly, caring, and outgoing to all those around him, including those who hated him so. He'd helped her so much without even knowing it, and she feared that loving him wouldn't be enough to pay this debt to him. Her previous fears and worries disappeared as she looked at the picture, realizing that he would most likely need her help now. Need her to be strong for him, and be a source of support that he always was for her. Quickly returning the picture to its place within the hole, she opened the wood box and plucked out a couple pieces of candy before shutting its lid and replacing the floorboards to hide it. Unwrapping one, she popped it into her mouth, a sense of comfort flowing through her as its sugary sweetness landed on her tongue. Enjoying the relaxing quality the candy had on her, she pocketed the other and quickly deactivated the seals protecting her room. Walking over to her bookcase, she grabbed one of the books from it and sat in a comfortable chair near it. Settling in, she began reading it, trying to not worry about what tomorrow would bring. And if something were indeed to happen, she really wanted to find out how this particular book ended. She really hoped that the hero would save the village and find the love he deserved. After some time silently reading, her head snapped up as someone knocked on her door. Closing her book and resting it in her lap, she called through it, "Ko, come in." The door opened, revealing a branded member of her clan, who bowed and said, "Hiyashi-sama wishes to see you in his study immediately." As the door closed behind the man, the heiress felt her heart drop into her stomach, a look of silent horror shining in her eyes. Had he somehow found out? How much did he know? What did he suspect? Gulping down her fear, she set her book aside and rose from her seat. Exiting her room, she walked down the hallway toward her father's study like she was a condemned prisoner heading toward the executioner. The few clan members she passed avoided her, recognizing her posture and feeling the aura of dread around her, knowing that it meant she was wanted by her father. Most of them took a similar posture when going to see him since, with the exception of Hanabi, he was angry with those he summoned to him. Most took pity on the child before continuing on, knowing personally that staring just made it worse. Stopping before his door, a shaking hand rose and knocked on the doorframe several times. After a few moments, his cold, passionless voice came through, speaking only, "Come in." Opening the door, Hinata entered and walked before him, taking a kneeling position, head down and not meeting his eyes. With the exception of the elders, no one was allowed to meet eyes with him, not that they wanted to, lest they see the disgust he held for them. Hiyashi sat, studying the girl before him carefully before asking, "Hinata, I have heard from several sources that you were summoned by the Hokage for a meeting in her office. I must ask myself what exactly she wanted from a failure such as yourself. Has your failures become so unavoidable that even Hokage-sama has taken notice of them?" "No, T2-sama," Hinata replied carefully, hiding the pain of his remarks with an efficiency she should not have. "So, then please tell me what exactly our esteemed leader wanted from one such as yourself." Hiyashi demanded, and his daughter replied, She wished T to offer me apprenticeship under her." She wasn't really lying to him, because that had been one of the things she had been asked. She merely forgot the rest of it. "I see. What exactly would a woman of her social standing see in someone such as yourself? Your status as heir of the most prestigious clan in Konoha, while holding power in many circles, is not so with that woman. And your constant failures should not merit such training, so I don't understand why she would ask this of you. Perhaps she simply has a soft spot for failures, much like the Sandaime. Both have taken an inordinate amount of interest in another failure, that blonde street rat Uzumaki Naruto." At hearing him insult Naruto, Hinata was forced to bite her tongue lest she lash out at him. Insulting her she could handle and was even expected, but to hear him speak so ill of her crush was almost too much. Whatever the case, you will simply have to refuse her offer. Failure or not, I refuse to have any member of the Hyuga clan learn under that woman. And if she makes an issue of it, simply inform her that I have significant sway with the council. Hiyashi said, a sneer on his face as he finished his sentence. Hinata bit back a scowl and said, yes, Tusama. He claimed her to be a failure of most things, but there was one thing she was an expert in. An expertise born from hiding pain, both emotional and physical, from her father and clan, lest their opinion of her drop even further than it already was. An expertise so good that she could quite possibly fool the torture and interrogation unit of Konoha. She was a masterful liar. Very well. You are excused, Hiyashi said before returning to his paperwork, treating her as if she no longer existed. Rising to her feet, she turned and exited the study. If she had any doubts in working with Tsunade before, they were put to rest by this enlightening conversation with her father. Sitting on the couch in Naruto's small, unkempt apartment, Tsunade sighed for what felt for quite possibly the 100th time since yesterday's meeting. Even with her plans, she couldn't stop the sick feeling that was resting in the pit of her stomach. She knew exactly what the problem was, but that didn't mean it was going to leave. In fact, it only made it worse. Next to her sat Shizune, Taunton laying in the dark-haired woman's lap being stroked lazily. When the dark-haired woman asked her master if she wished to be accompanied on this painful mission, Tsunade almost told her no. But then she realized that after hearing this news, the annoying young blonde they cared for would require all the comfort he could get. To a boy as loyal as him, being banished was akin to being executed. This is wrong, Tsunade Shisho. Shizune said for the 20th time that day, and Tsunade said, I know that, Shizune. I don't like it any more than you do. But the only way to stop it would be overthrowing the daimyo and taking power, and that'd be impossible even with all of Konoha's forces. Both had been to the daimyo's court and met his elite forces, the samurai. While the 12 guardians were more famous, they were merely his personal guards. His elite forces consisted of the samurai, a group of highly trained, dedicated soldiers who would willingly die for their leader. But what made them truly dangerous was their armor, which were inscribed with special seals that created a barrier around the wearer that absorbed any external sources of chakra, whether it came from the wearer or an enemy, using it to power the barrier. However, they were able to use an internal form of chakra manipulation known as Butsu Nairiki, which allowed them to augment their bodies in a variety of ways. They even had a powerful trump card in the form of Hugaku Riki, which caused their strength, speed, and agility to be increased severalfold, at the cost of severe damage to their muscles and bones from prolonged use. But they were willing to suffer that pain and sustain that damage, all to defend the daimyo. Then there was his feared legion, which was much larger in force, but were little more than brutal psychotics who swarmed their target with superior numbers and an undeterrable need to kill, rape, and pillage anything before them. They were deemed too dangerous to be allowed to roam freely, so they were often kept in barracks that would be better described as a prison camp, the stone walls rising above those of Konoha, the steel gates locked from the outside and the walls constantly patrolled. Their brutal nature was well known, and teachers sometimes threatened students that if they performed too poorly, they'd be sent to the capital as slave labor for the legion. This was a death sentence for anyone, and the poor victim would often suffer beatings, rape, and worse before finally being mercifully killed. Fortunately, no Hokage nor daimyo would ever allow such a thing to happen to anyone under either of their command, so the threat was useless once the students learned that. Two pairs of eyes turned to the door as the lock jiggled for a few moments before it swung open, allowing them to see Naruto standing in the doorway, blue eyes wide at the sight of his Ba-chan and Nei-chan sitting on his couch awaiting him. What are you doing here? Naruto asked, and Tsunade couldn't repress the sigh as she said, Come on in, Naruto. We've got something to tell you. What? Is Sasuke Teme alright? Did something happen to Neji? Or Choji? What about bushy brows? Is it Akamaru? The blonde questioned as he moved over to them quickly, fear filling his eyes. But his fellow blonde shook her head gently as she said, No Naruto, they're all just fine. Then what is it? Naruto asked, and Shizune suggested, Maybe you should sit down first, Naruto-kun. Why? If my friends are okay, it can't really be that bad, can it? Naruto replied with a broad grin, but it quickly disappeared at the somber looks he received from both Tsunade and the usually chipper Shizune. Even Taunton seemed depressed about whatever it was. Laying in Shizune's lap, soulful eyes locked on him. Despite what many people thought, Naruto was a highly perceptive and wise person. He quickly realized that whatever they had to tell him was bad if everyone was down about it. Immediately, his mind went into overdrive, thinking of every possible problem that could cause such a reaction from members of his family, as he took a seat between the two. Is there something wrong with Ero-sennin? Naruto asked as he looked to her, and Tsunade answered, no. Naruto. Is it Iruka-sensei? Is he sick? No. Naruto, listen. It's you, isn't it Ba-chan? You've got old person cancer or something? No. Naruto, just listen for a. It's Tsuchi-Gigi. He's closing down his store? Naruto. All eyes turned to the brunette, even the pig in her lap, as tears began flowing down her cheeks, looking like she was about to start sobbing any minute. Even Tsunade was shocked by this outburst from her normally calm, level-headed assistant. Nei-chan? What is it? Naruto asked, his eyes glued on her, dread flooding him as he wondered what had caused this reaction in her. Yo, you're being banished, that's what. Shizune cried, tears still trickling down her cheeks. And with that, the entire world stopped, growing silent save for the occasional sniffle from the silently crying Shizune. In fact, it was so silent, Tsunade would swear she could hear the sound of Naruto's heart shattering. Butsu Nairiki, Buddha's inner strength. Fugaku Riki, strength of hell. For what felt like hours but in reality was only a minute, the normally loud, energetic blonde sat in stunned silence, staring at the dark-haired woman in disbelief. Tsunade could feel a painful ache in her chest as she waited for the blonde's reaction when reality came crashing down upon him. You're lying. He didn't speak loudly, instead in a soft tone that seemed to beg for what he was saying to be the truth. Naruto. Shizune began, but the blonde cut her off by jumping to his feet and turning to face them, his tone a little louder, tears welling in his eyes as he continued, you're lying. You're mad that I called you Ero Nei-chan in the hospital and now you and Ba-chan are trying to get back at me by lying to me. Naruto. She's not lying. Tsunade replied, the emotions she'd been repressing finally getting the better of her, tears beginning to flow down her own cheeks. But Naruto turned to her, yelling as tears ran down his face, you have to be. I can't be banished. I didn't do anything wrong. I know you didn't do anything wrong. I tried to keep it from happening. Oh Kami, how I tried. Tsunade sobbed, burying her face in her own hands. At the sight of his Ba-chan sobbing, Naruto sniffed and charged, practically tackling the elder blonde as he buried his face into her shoulder, arms wrapped around her neck as he broke down into a sobbing fit of his own. At the feeling of the blonde gripping her tight and sobbing into her shoulder, Tsunade wrapped her arms around her adopted grandson and cried, muttering, sorry, in between sobs. Shizune watched her mentor and the boy she'd grown to see as a brother comfort one another and smiled sadly through her own silent tears at the touching image. After several minutes of sobbing that slowly turned into silent crying, Naruto sniffed as he asked, what's going to happen to me? Don't you worry Naruto-kun. I've been working on a plan to help you since the decision was passed down. I'm making sure that they realize what a mistake they've made, and you won't be alone in this. Tsunade replied, gently stroking his soft golden locks. Really? Naruto asked, sniffing as he raised back to look at her face, wiping excess tears from his eyes. Smiling, Tsunade nodded and replied, of course. Do you honestly believe that I just sit back and allow them to do this to you? I am your Ba-chan, after all, and they're not throwing my gaki out without a fight. Thanks. Naruto began, and after a few moments of indecision, added, Ka-san. This caused the blonde Hokage to stare at the uncertain blonde. Turning to Shizune, she noted the confused look the woman was sending her and the orange-clad blonde in her arms. What? Naruto asked, uncomfortable with the looks being sent to him, and Tsunade asked, what did you just call me? Ka-san? Naruto replied, and Tsunade asked, and why did you do that? The normal self-assured blonde looked to an interesting stain on his couch and replied, I don't know. I guess it's because you've been more like a mother than anyone else, and I've always wanted one. Sighing, he added, I won't do it again. Staring at the blonde, Tsunade gave a smirk and gently flicked him on the forehead, getting an indignant squawk from him. Chuckling, she said, you have no problem calling me Ba-chan. So why would you have the problem with Ka-san? So you don't mind? Naruto asked, turning to her with a hopeful gleam in the formerly despondent blue orbs, and giving him a kiss on the forehead, she said, of course, Gaki. Honestly, I've come to think of you as my son, and I want you to call me Ka-san. Smirking, she added, besides, it makes me feel a lot younger than Ba-chan, any day. Really? Naruto asked, and giving him a nod, Tsunade replied, of course Sochi. Once more tears flowed down the blonde's smiling face as he lunged forward and gave her another hug around the neck. Returning it, the elder blonde sighed as she thought, I wish I'd been there for you 13 years ago, Naruto. You deserved a better life than you'd gotten. But that changes today. Hey Naruto, can your Nei-chan get a hug too? Shizune asked, and wiggling out of the Hokage's arms, Naruto leapt onto the dark-haired woman. A squealing tauntaun barely avoided being crushed between them as he wrapped his arms around her chest and gave her a tight hug. Returning it, albeit softer, Shizune's previously held fears and anxiety concerning their plans melted away from the warmth flowing from the blonde. After several seconds, Tsunade grinned and said, all right, you two, the love fest can wait till later. Me and Shizune have a lot of work to do for our plan to be successful. Shizune whined in disappointment as she and the blonde released each other, Naruto turning his eyes to Tsunade as he asked, I want to help too. Giving the blonde a devious grin, Tsunade said, of course you can, and I have the perfect part for you, Naruto. But first things first, remember those pranks you used to pull? At the boy's nod, Tsunade said, well, I want you to start pulling them again. Do as many as you can, as grand as you can, to anyone you want. Except for the Aburame, Akamichi, Yamanaka, Nara, Inazuka, and Gabanata clans, okay? Anyone else is fair game, but no serious injuries or permanent damage to buildings. Rising to his feet, Naruto stood at attention and gave a proper salute as he said, will do, Ka-san. I know you will. Now get going. You've got a lot of work to do and not much time to do it in. Tsunade said, and as the blonde turned to leave, she swatted him playfully on the butt to encourage him to hurry up. Rising to her own feet, Tsunade dusted herself off and straightened her clothes before turning to Shizune, who had done the same. Come along Shizune, me and you have our own work to do. Tsunade said, her smirk growing from devious to downright malicious. At the sight of her smirk, Shizune couldn't suppress a shiver that passed through her as she followed her sensei, glad that she wasn't the one it was for. Walking through the streets, both Shizune and Tsunade shook with unreleased laughter as they saw exactly how quickly and enthusiastically Naruto had taken to her orders. Stores were doused in a veritable rainbow of vibrant, garish colors, others reeking of a symphony of noxious odors. People were either covered in mud, paint, or, well, neither wanted to guess what the third substance was. And even now she could see an army of orange-clad blondes continuing with a gusto she wished most shinobi could use. At the sight of the strolling Hokage, an overweight bald man that looked as if he had been attacked by a paint store waddled over as he cried, Tsunade-sama. Tsunade-sama, the brat has gone mad. You need to do something about him. Looking around casually, Tsunade asked, how can you be sure that it is indeed young Uzumaki Naruto that is doing this? I saw him with my own two eyes. Dressed in that orange abomination, with that damned grin of his. The man replied, and Tsunade said, I see. Well then, I shall investigate and see if it is indeed the brat who is doing this, and a proper punishment given. Starting to walk away, she missed the darkening of the portly man's eyes at the kanji adorning her back. However, she didn't miss the muttered, demon lover, in a tone he believed wouldn't be heard. And the next thing the man knew, a immaculately manicured hand was gripping him by the throat, his feet dangling at least 4 feet off the ground, panicked eyes staring down into the hard gaze of the Hokage, a look reminiscent of a predator eyeing a fresh kill in the normally warm chocolate orbs. What did you say? She snarled, and clawing ineffectually at her wrist, he gasped and replied, no nothing. Tossing him aside like a sack of garbage and listening as he crashed satisfyingly into his cart, she said coldly, that's what I thought you said. It seems that you are among those who, thanks to Sarutobi-sensei, have forgotten that Konohagakure is a dictatorship, and I am your ruler. Speak to me that way again and you shall face a much harsher punishment." Walking away from the frightened man pulling himself from the broken remains of his cart, Shizune looked to her teacher and asked, "Hey, are you sure that was wise?" "Of course not, Shizune." Tsunade replied casually, looking to the Hokage monument where her head was already under construction before continuing, "I've just been walked on too much since returning, and I refuse to allow people like that believe just because the council has deemed me an old piece of carpet used to clean their shoes on, that everyone can do the same." Looking into the dark eyes of her assistant, Tsunade added, "But I do believe that I was correct in stating that sensei's the main reason for a lot of this. He was old, ready and due for retirement, so when he was forced to retake the hat, he didn't want to improve the village anymore. He merely wanted peaceful seas so the boat wouldn't rock until his next successor was found, allowing parasites like Danzo and the council to dig deeper into the flesh of Konoha, and those small wounds have festered into the open sores there today." Shizune merely turned her eyes to the road, silently thinking of what her teacher had said. Smiling, Tsunade patted the younger woman on the shoulder as she said, "Come on, Shizune. We've got more important things to do than gaze at our own navels." "Right, Tsunade-sama," Shizune said with a nod, her mood rising as she and her teacher hurried along to the Hokage Tower to begin the next stage of their plan. As they walked, they passed under a pair of enbu standing atop a building. One was a purple-haired woman wearing a cat mask and with a traditional ninjutsu strapped to her back, handle rising above her shoulder. Her partner was a black-haired man wearing what appeared to be a wolf mask, and instead of a ninjutsu, he had a pair of Chinese hook swords crossed at his lower back. Cat was watching Wolf, who was leaning against a wall doubled over in laughter, holding his stomach. "Do you believe we should stop Uzumaki-kun Shishiguro?" Cat asked, and he shook his head, gasping for breath as he panted, "And no way, you go. I haven't had this good all laugh since he became a genin." Straightening up, he took a few more deep breaths, collecting himself before adding, "Besides, from what I've heard on the shinobi grapevine, he's been banished from the village. Nothing we can do to as loyal a kid as him can match that." Turning, they saw a Naruto wearing a black bandana over his head that went over his eyes with matching hat and cape land before an unsuspecting villager. Before she could react, he'd drawn a paintbrush and with 3 quick slashes, had painted an "in" on her chest in bright orange, which was noticeable on her red top. As she cried out in shock, he leapt away, looking quite ridiculous with his cape fluttering behind him, paintbrush raised like a sword. The dread pirate Naruto strikes again for ramen lovers everywhere. At hearing that cry, Shishiguro collapsed to the rooftop they stood on, howling with laughter as Yugo failed to hide her own laughter, though she managed to retain more dignity than her partner. Upon the Hokage monument, 4 orange-clad figures worked feverishly with spray paint and paintbrushes, leaving their mark on the faces watching over the village from such a high vantage point. The rigging system he'd come with during his academy days was refined and improved into a marvel of simplicity and efficiency, allowing him to work far faster than ever before. Red, orange, blue, green, yellow, pink, every color was being used. But instead of the haphazard graffiti he'd done as a student, he had more time to work, using a massive henge to keep his masterpiece, and the work he was doing on it a secret until it could be revealed. And he grinned, barely able to wait until he was leaving the village, when his masterwork would be unleashed upon a waiting public. He couldn't suppress a childish giggle as he imagined the looks on their faces when it finally was. A trio of 10-year-olds charged through the streets, wearing green goggles over their eyes along with a hat and cape matching that of the dread pirate Naruto. The leader, a boy in yellow with a green scarf, had a couple cans of shaving cream, spraying down unsuspecting people with their contents. Behind him was an orange-haired girl with rosy cheeks, a bag of paint-filled balloons hanging from her arm, which she was tossing at those who avoided being hit with shaving cream or at buildings. And at the rear was a boy with a snotty nose and his goggles lenses being specially made. He was carrying a sack of toilet paper, which was being strung from trees, buildings, and people alike. The trio, known as the Konohamaru Corps, had decided to join their Aniki in his final era of pranking, a decision endorsed by Konohamaru's uncle, Naruto himself, and even the boy's mentor Ebisu. Of course, if anyone asked, the bet he made with Iruka on whether or not his honorable students group could cause more mayhem than the reigning prankster King Naruto had nothing at all to do with it. Nope, not a thing. Sakura sat on her bed, hugging a teddy bear tied against her chest, deep in thought about what had happened today with Tsunade, Ino, and Kakashi. Her room, once the epitome of what a girl's room should look like, had undergone a metamorphosis into one that belonged to a shinobi. The walls were still pink, but they now held shelves stacked with books on chakra theory, chakra training, and Konoha history, along with other books she enjoyed reading. The walls also held replicas of various shinobi weaponry, including a staff, a ninjutsu, and even Zabuza's legendary Kabikari Hucho, though none were actually used. On her bedside table sat an alarm clock, a lamp, and a picture frame. But instead of holding a picture of just Sasuke, it held a picture of Team 7. She was standing smiling between Sasuke and Naruto, the former scowling and the latter giving one of his bright grins. Behind them stood Kakashi, giving his trademark eye smile to the camera, his hand proudly on Sasuke's head. In fact, the only thing from her old life, still inside the room was her teddy bear, Fu-chan, which she'd had for as long as she could remember. The teddy bear was rather old, with several multicolored patches standing out on her otherwise brown cloth skin, and one button eye missing. However much she tried to be a shinobi and have her room decorated as such, the pinkhead just couldn't get rid of the teddy bear that had listened to her hopes, dreams, fears, and insecurities when no one else would. Fu-chan, what should I do? Sakura asked, turning the bear so they were facing one another. I mean, the sensei I thought was so cool turned out to be a complete ass. Sasuke-kun tried to betray everyone who ever cared or supported him for power and even tried to kill his best friend. As for Naruto, he was always so nice to me and I never noticed him, yet he almost got himself killed and willingly gave up his own dreams of romance just to make me happy. Should I take Tsunade-sama's offer? Ino said that she and our friends would be supportive of me either way, but Sasuke-kun. In spite of everything, I still love him. Sakura said to the bear, and asked, do you think this is how Naruto feels when it comes to me? He's tired of being hurt, but he can't stop from loving me. And I've given him more than enough reason to do so, haven't I? And kissing Ino. What was I thinking? You were thinking how damn why that ponytailed blonde is, and want her beneath you, moaning your name like you're Kami and she's praying to you. No one asked you. Well, you were asking the bear, so I thought answering was free game. Yeah, I was asking Fu. Not, inner Sakura, Fu. Is your name Fu? No, no it isn't. You don't have to be such a bitch to me. I'm only trying to help. Well, what do you think I should do? Do it. Training from Tsunade, Chunin rank, and getting mucho onigiri points with our whisker-faced blonde and his hot lavender-eyed crush, so potential threesome. So many pros, so few cons, it'd be ridiculous not to take it. Turning to her teddy bear, Sakura sighed and said, well, what do you think, Fu-chan? Listening silently for a few moments, the pinkette nodded with a smile as she said, you're right, Fu-chan. Hugging it tightly, she said, thanks for the advice. You're so helpful, unlike a certain someone else I could mention. Hey, Tsunade stared down at the scroll she'd been writing on with a sense of satisfaction. Even though she had no power over the fate of Naruto, she could still make sure that the council and village understood exactly what it meant to get on the bad side of a senju, especially her. Rereading her work, a sense of pride filled her, and she smirked wondering how many of the old fuckers were going to suffer from strokes over this. I, Senju Tsunade, Godem Hokage, do hereby appoint Hyuga Hinata as my second apprentice, effective immediately. I, Senju Tsunade, Godem Hokage, do hereby appoint Uzumaki Naruto as apprentice of Jiraiya of the Sannin, effective immediately. I, Senju Tsunade, Godem Hokage, do hereby release the contents of the Hokage library into my possession to be returned at my discretion. I, Senju Tsunade, Godem Hokage, do hereby appropriate the sum total of 8,857,411 ryo from the village's accounts to be paid to Uzumaki Naruto as preparation for 13 years of emotional abuse and criminal negligence done to him by most of Konoha's citizens and its justice system. I, Senju Tsunade, Godem Hokage, Do hereby order the Hyuga clan to pay reparations to Hyuga Hinata in the form of 1,346,899 ryo for years of emotional abuse done to her by members of the Hyuga, Hiyashi in particular. I, Senju Tsunade, Godem Hokage, do hereby promote Uzumaki Naruto and Hyuga Hinata to the position of Chunin, effective immediately. I, Senju Tsunade, Godem Hokage, do hereby release the Sandame's law regarding the parentage of Chunin Uzumaki Naruto, effective on the day of his banishment. I, Senju Tsunade, Godem Hokage, do hereby instate Jiraiya of the Sannin as Rokudame Hokage, effective on the day of Uzumaki Naruto's banishment. I, Senju Tsunade, Godem Hokage, do hereby ban the use of seals or jutsu meant to control or punish individuals from being placed upon any willing or unwilling member of this village. Any and all of such seals and jutsu must be registered with the office of the Hokage, complete with a method for removal. Any individual or group who is found to be using such seals or jutsu or has used such seals or jutsu in the past without a method of removal is to be executed publicly, regardless of rank, social status, or standing within the village, as a warning to those who wish to use such methods. Any person subjected to such seal or jutsu, should it be unable to be removed, shall be granted land and monetary compensation on the order of 1 million ryo for every year they have been subjected to the seal or jutsu in question, the money for which will be taken from the accused's accounts or lands. I, Senju Tsunade, Godem Hokage, do hereby pardon myself, my first apprentice Shizune, my second apprentice Hinata, Jiraiya's apprentice Uzumaki Naruto, clan head Inuzuka Sume, and underscore of all crimes against Konohagakure no Sato and Hai no Kuni. Also, I do verbi release them from any and all obligations or duties to Konohagakure no Sato past, present, or future, including from the shinobi ranks of Konohagakure no Sato, with all current ranks and titles, to move about freely around the country of Hai no Kuni. However, should they choose to do so, they reserve the right to rejoin the ranks of Konoha shinobi should such an offer be made. The empty space had been left for the possible addition of Haruno Sakura, pending tomorrow's meeting. Should she deny, the scroll could easily be edited to remove the open space. Carefully rolling it up, she set the scroll beside two others. One contained the combined reparations for both Naruto and Hinata, the money being taken out by Shizune, while the other contained the Hokage library, including Sensei's summoning contract as well as the Forbidden Scroll. Looking at the scroll holding her orders, the blonde wondered if she would be adding her Sochi's teammate Sakura to the scroll tomorrow morning or not. Turning to the large window, she burst into a fit of laughter at the sight of a large ball explode, raining multi-colored paint upon several buildings and you suspecting people on the street. Tsunade blinked blearily at her desk, head drooping closer and closer to it as the sun rose in the picture window behind her as she cursed herself for having Sakura and Hinata meet her so damn early. Paperwork sat forgotten on the side OFR desk, and most of it would remain there, because she knew that a lot of it was simply civilian or shinobi bitching about something they should be able to handle themselves. A smirk crossed her face as she knew that most of the bitching today was about her hand's mission, prankathon pulled by Naruto, with unsuspected help from his little fan club, Anko, Kiba, Katetsu and Izumo, turning it into a contest of sorts. The winner had been decided at sundown, with Naruto squeaking out a victory, with the Konohamaru Corps and Anko tying for second, Kiba claiming third, with the team of Katetsu and Izumo coming in last. The prankers had been privately disciplined by herself to keep up appearances. Anko was probably still bitching that there wasn't enough dango at the private punishment banquet she forced them to attend at the Hokage mansion. She'd heard that Ebisu was displeased with the honorable grandson and his friends for their actions yesterday, believing they should have done better and won the prank war, not to mention his bet. Of course, Konohamaru merely used his loss as further proof of the blonde's worthiness as a rival, declaring that he would beat the blonde someday. Kiba, for his part, claimed he would have won had he not still been injured, with Katetsu and Izumo both showing themselves to be ashamed of their actions, at least publicly. Privately they both couldn't stop laughing and even planning to start another one next month just for the hell of it. As for Anko, well, she didn't give a shit about what anyone thought, merely enjoying the event, and even had a little fun at the end of their banquet with the contest's victor. poor blonde was probably still traumatized after the purple-haired Tokubetsu Junin rubbed up against his back, making sure to press her barely concealed chest into his back as she purred lewd, downright obscene things in his ear and gently stroked his whisker marks. Naruto currently had a title belt, bearing the Konoha leaf surrounded by the words, Konoha's heavyweight prankster champion, on the large gold-painted front plate. How such a belt was so quickly and expertly created was unknown, though it was assumed that Tenten's father, an ex-ninja who used his ninjutsu skills to quickly and efficiently create weapons, did so. Said belt was even now being worn by the proud blonde, whose smile grew as he showed it off to his friends, adding a little good-natured boasting with the visual. Maybe I can get a few minutes of sleep before one of them gets here. Tsunade thought as she absent-mindedly grabbed some of the paperwork and made a makeshift pillow pile to rest her head on. A smirk crossed her face as she realized, hey, all their useless bitching actually has some use after all. She was fast asleep as soon as her head touched the papers, which softly crinkled as her head rested on them. Her walk was slow, deliberate, much different now that the day of reckoning, as it were, was now upon her. Yesterday she'd been so assured of her decision, having gone to sleep believing she was doing the right thing. But now that she was actually about to face the precipice and consider diving into the dark abyss, filled with the uncertainties her choice would bring. She was honestly and truly scared, terrified of what exactly could be awaiting her at the bottom of that fall. Would it be acceptance, friendship, even the love she had yearned so long for? Or would it be the same rejection and cold indifference bordering on disdain she'd been given so many times before? But the thought of those bright, expressive blue orbs of Naruto's giving anything less than complete and unconditional friendship and love seemed wrong. As if they were wholly incapable of doing such a thing except to his most hated enemies, but even then there would be a shimmer of hope that a more amicable coexistence could be found between Naruto and his enemy. That was the paradox of the blonde, a boy who'd been shown so much hatred, so much emotional abuse that his being so open and friendly to everyone around him should have been impossible. And yet, he gave his heart to anyone willing to offer him any form of relationship, even if it was merely the same common courtesy of accepting his existence everyone else got instinctually. Hey Hinata, what are you doing out so early? Sakura asked as she jogged up to the beige coat-wearing heiress, falling into step with her as the two walked down the street, grumbling genin teams and workers cleaning up the remains of yesterday's prank war. I have a meeting with the Hokage. Hinata replied, and Sakura blinked a few times before asking, you have one too? At the demure girl's nod, Sakura remembered the question she was asked before leaving the blonde Hokage's office yesterday, and her answer of Hyuga Hinata. Oh, about what? Sakura asked, and Hinata replied, I don't think I should tell you. Sakura nodded, but then asked casually, is it about Naruto and his banishment? At the stunned look Hinata was giving her, Sakura knew that was indeed the case. And to be honest, she was surprised that the Hokage took her advice seriously. Finally, the pale-eyed girl found her voice and asked conspiratorially, how do you know? Because that's what my meeting is about too. Sakura answered, and Hinata nodded, smiling softly that at least someone on the blonde's team cared about him. Ino, despite being logical, was also a huge gossip, and the tale given to her by the pinkette next to her was quickly making its way through the shinobi circles. Much like civilians, shinobi were generally terrible about gossip. But unlike civilians, gossip with shinobi was passed with the same secrecy that a vital message was, going only to those they could trust with the info. And at the moment, shinobi opinion of the famed Sharingan-I Kakashi was at an all-time low, considering the sheer hypocrisy he showed in regards to his own frequently spouted motto, one given by his sensei, the godlike Minato. Furthermore, no matter how old they were, most shinobi revered their Junin sensei as a deity, a wise and benevolent figure who was to take their students and mold them into the shinobi they were today. For Kakashi to besmirch such a venerable position in such a way, allowing personal bias to overtake him and cause him to ruin not one, but two future shinobi of Konoha at such a venerable stage of their career was considered the very height of idiocy. Which meant, in the eyes of most shinobi, Kakashi didn't need to be doing missions. He needed to be given a box of crayons, some coloring books, and put into a playpen so he couldn't hurt himself or others with his stupidity. Of course, being the quiet, introverted girl she was, many people felt her a trustworthy person to soothe the gossip itch. So she was quickly informed of Sakura's interaction with Kakashi, but not much else, since while a gossip, Ino knew some things were too personal, and in her case embarrassing, to tell. Thus Hinata didn't know how Sakura took it, but considering that the people who told her didn't speak negatively of the girl, she probably believed her reaction to be as negative as everyone else's. Entering the large building of the Hokage in silence, they quickly walked up to the office door of their leader, the secretary nodding to them before pushing the call button and speaking, "Genins Haruno and Hyuga are here to speak to you, Hokage-sama." After several long moments, the speaker came to life with a sleep-heavy reply of, "Send him in." "Please enter," the woman said, motioning to the wooden door. Looking to one another, both girls nodded and opened the door to their future, and both nearly burst into a fit of laughter. Because sitting behind her desk was Tsunade with a half-asleep look on her face, a pile of papers before her with one sticking to the side of her face. Hokage-sama," Sakura managed while fighting her giggles, and at the woman's questioning gaze, pointed to the side of her face to indicate the paper stuck there. Blinking blearily several times, the woman reached up and felt the paper stuck to her face. This woke her up quickly, and she removed it before working hastily to somewhat organize her pillow into a stack of papers. Coughing into her hand, a mild blush on her face, the woman said, "Well, you both know why you're here, correct?" At their affirmative nods, the blonde woman nodded as she asked, "Remember, that this is going to be very difficult for both of you, and no one will fault you should you decide not to. So, are you willing to aid me in helping Naruto?" Hinata's previous insecurities flooded her mind, trying to break her fragile grip on her reserve. However, the smiling face of her blonde crush appeared in her mind's eye, reminding her of the person they were banishing. The determined young man, who in spite of his faults, worked hard to better himself and would gladly die to protect the village he loved, even if they would sooner have him dead than do the same for him. Frowning as she found her resolve, Hinata nodded and spoke in a soft, yet still firm tone, "Yes, Hokage-sama." Watching Hinata, Sakura smiled slightly as she turned to face their leader as she said, "Of course, Hokage-sama." Smiling at the two young women before her, Tsunade folded her hands before her on the desk as she said, "Very well, but do not forget this was your decision and you knew the difficulty of it. Now, I want the both of you to pack anything you might find necessary for an extended trip outside the village." "Why?" Sakura asked, and Tsunade replied, "Because you are going to be joining Chunin Uzumaki Naruto during his banishment." Both stared at the brown-eyed woman in stunned silence, their minds trying to decipher what they were just told. Finally, Hinata's synapses fired off in the right order to allow an intelligent response of, "What? That is what you have agreed to. To join him during his exile and make sure that he has friends during this, the most difficult time in his life." Like stated, to say this won't be easy is an understatement, so do either of you wish to back out? This will be your last chance, for after you leave this office, you are bound to a mission given by the Hokage. So, do you wish to decline? Tsunade asked, carefully studying the two girls, who'd become stone still in thought. Finally, as one they answered, "No." Smiling, Tsunade said, "Thank you both. And congratulations." "For what?" Sakura asked, and pulling a pair of Chunin vests from her desk, she laid them before the two girls. Fighting not to laugh at their dumbstruck faces as she said, "For your promotions to the rank of Chunin by order of the Hokage. Naruto has been too, and will be given his vest later. As for you two, I suggest you pack them away while still in the village. Seeing you both in those vests would raise suspicions we don't need at this stage in our plans." "Oh, of course, Hokage-sama," Hinata said, taking it and holding it as if it would turn to dust if she handled it with anything less than the utmost care. Beside her, Sakura was still staring at the vest, her fingers gently running over the fabric, as if trying to imprint the texture of the vest to memory. Smiling, Tsunade said, "Hurry along and pack. I made sure he'd be leaving soon, and you don't want him to get a head start on you." Both nodded, carefully sealed away their vests in a scroll, and left the office as fast as possible without running. Watching them leave, she took hold of the scroll with her official orders and quickly made a few edits. "I, Senju Tsunade, Godem Hokage, do hereby pardon myself, my first apprentice Shizune, my second apprentice Hinata, Jiraiya's apprentice Uzumaki Naruto, clan head Inuzuka Tsume, and my third apprentice Haruno Sakura of all crimes against Konohagakure no Sato and Hai no Kuni. Also, I do verbally release them from any and all obligations or duties to Konohagakure no Sato past, present, or future, including from the shinobi ranks of Konohagakure no Sato, with all current ranks and titles, to move about freely around the country of Hai no Kuni. However, should they choose to do so, they reserve the right to rejoin the ranks of Konoha shinobi should such an offer be made. I, Senju Tsunade, Godem Hokage, do hereby promote Haruno Sakura to the rank of Chunin and take her on as my third apprentice, effective immediately. Rolling it back up, she carefully sealed it and set it aside. Reaching into her desk, she pulled out a bottle of sake and a small dish. Pouring herself some, she lifted it into the air, said, "To the continued fortuitous fruition of my plans," tilted the ceramic dish back, and drained it of its contents before pouring herself a second cup. As she downed the second cup, her door opened and Tsume walked in, took one look at Tsunade's current activity, and smirked as she asked, "You do realize doing that alone makes you an alcoholic, right? Well then, why don't you join me so I'm just a drunk?" Tsunade said with a smirk as she quickly brought out a second dish, and the Inuzuka matriarch sat before her, watching as the buxom blonde poured a cup for her. "So, how did it go with your clan?" Tsunade asked, and downing her sake, Tsume replied, "They understand. In fact, most of them want to come with me, feeling that the council's blatant disrespect shows them to be some of the most disloyal mongrels ever seen and unworthy of serving alongside. I convinced them not to do so just yet, but they still aren't happy with the traitorous acts of the council against the village, Alpha. And did you tell Hana and Kiba about your more personal reasons?" Tsunade asked, and Tsume nodded as she said, Hana expressed the fact she'd begun sniffing around the blonde, and Kiba. Well, what? Tsunade asked, and Tsume replied, "He went into convulsions and almost swallowed his own tongue." Tsunade spit her fourth cup of sake into the air as she burst into a fit of laughter. Ino yawned as she sat up in bed, blinking the sleep from her eyes as her covers pooled around her waist, stretching her arms. Shoving the blankets away, she turned and hung her feet over the edge of her bed, feet slipping into a pair of fluffy white bunny slippers. Wiggling her toes in them with a small smile, she stood and stretched her limbs, listening to the satisfied pops of joints after being disused for so long. Rubbing at an eye, she walked out of her bedroom and down the stairs to the living room, where her father sat reading the paper. And Naruto sat on the couch, smiling somewhat somberly as he saw her. "Naruto?" Ino asked, not believing her eyes, and the blonde waved as he replied, "Hey Ino-chan. I like your pajamas." Ino looked down at her pajamas, which consisted of a light purple baby tee with smiling cartoon kitten on the front, deep purple pajama pants, and her bunny slippers. When out and about, she was about trendy and trying to get the attention of Sasuke with her looks and budding body, which caused most boys to melt into puddles of goo. But for bed, the order of business was comfort, not style. Crossing her arms over her chest, she smiled as she realized that she made even comfortable look damn why. "So, what brings you out to my house so early, Naruto?" Ino asked as she joined them in the living room, and the blonde grinned sheepishly as he replied, "A favor. A rather personal one." Without even looking, she knew her father was listening, and taking a seat next to the blonde Uzumaki, she smiled as she asked, "What kind of favor?" "Well, you probably don't know, but I've been, heir." Naruto muttered, and Ino finished, "You've been banished." "What? How?" Naruto asked, and Ino said, "I'm a shinobi, I have my sources." She obviously enjoyed the look of awe being given to her by the whisker-cheeked blonde beside her. "I told her, Daddy," Ino cried, trying her damnedest to glare holes through the newspaper he was looking at, and Naruto managed to hide his snickering behind his hands, shoulders shaking ever so slightly. "Anyways," Ino said, rounding on the blonde, giving him a look that stopped his snickering as she asked, "What is this personal favor you need of me?" "Well, as you know, I'm being banished, and I need you to look after someone for me," Naruto said, and at this, Ino raised an eyebrow as she asked, "Who? Sakura?" A thought crossed her mind, and the pale blonde smirked as she added, "Or is it Hinata?" No, Naruto replied, and continued, "It's actually a dear old friend of mine." My only friend before Team 7, actually. Reaching into his pocket, he retrieved a scroll, which received a curious look from Ino, and with a nip of his thumb, he dragged it across one of the seals on the scroll. In a burst of smoke, an orange stuffed fox sat on the paper. It was missing a black button-like eye, and its orange fur was threadbare in some places, with other places covered in striped, polka-dotted, or solid color patches. One of the large ears drooped down, and its fuzzy white-tipped orange tail seemed to be new, having been replaced. A blue bandana with a crudely made Hite 8 on it hung around the fox's neck completed its appearance. This is Chu, and I would bring him with me, but he's very loyal and loves Konoha, so he doesn't want to leave. We'll miss each other, but I can't bear to force him to come with me. So I was hoping you could look after him for me while I'm gone. Naruto said, unconsciously stroking the toy's head. Why me? Why not Sakura, Hinata, or anyone else? Ino asked, and Naruto looked away as he said, well, I would, but he doesn't feel safe or comfortable around Hinata-chan's family, and I think Fu would get jealous if Sakura-chan brought Chu home. You know about Fu? Ino asked, and Naruto nodded as he said, yeah, during the second part of the Chunin exam. She was feeling scared, so I decided that it might help if we talked. During our talk she told me about Fu, but was embarrassed afterwards, so I told her about Chu. Looking hopefully to the Yamanaka heiress, Naruto asked, so, will you take care of Chu while I'm away? Giving him a reassuring smile, Ino nodded and said, of course. Thanks, Naruto said with a relieved smile of his own, and said, if you need to talk or feeling lonely or something, you can speak to Chu. He's a pretty good listener, and he's always willing to lend a comforting back to cry on. Just make sure that he gets ramen at least once a day. He tends to get cranky when he doesn't. Well, he sounds like a great friend. Ino said, and Naruto answered, yeah, he is. Taking hold of the fox plushie, he lifted it up and turned it so they were eye to eye. Chu, this is it. Might be a while before we see each other again, so I want you to be good for Ino-chan. Naruto said, and listening to something only he could hear, he gave the fox a stern look as he said, no, I don't believe that Ino-chan would appreciate your perverted sense of humor very much, so I don't want you to be telling those kinds of jokes around her. Listening to nothing, the blonde's eyes glistened as he said, yeah, I'm gonna miss you too, Chu. Don't forget about me while I'm away, okay? Hugging the fox doll, Naruto sniffed and sat the fox before Ino, wiping his eyes on the back of his sleeve. Well, I need to be going, Naruto said, rising off the couch as he said, thanks again, Ino. Watching the blonde exit the house, she heard her father turn the paper. But when she wasn't looking, he'd peek around her over the newspaper, watching her study the fox plush carefully. Through his secret surveillance, he saw his daughter pick up the stuffed fox and say, well Chu, I guess I should show you to your new room. Returning to his newspaper and actually reading it, Inoichi chuckled as he heard his daughter scold, no. You cannot sleep in my panty drawer, Ero Kitsune. Naruto sighed as he walked toward the gates of Konoha for what might be the last time. He made sure that visiting Ino to get her to take care of Chu was the last thing he did as a Konoha shinobi. Now all that was left was to begin his unjust banishment, and he knew that many people would be ecstatic for this. But a small smile made its way across his face, because he would be able to reveal his masterpiece. Closing in on the gate, he stopped, blinked his eyes, then began rubbing them. After vigorously rubbing his fist into them, he blinked and looked again, expecting what he saw to be gone. But Tsunade, Shizune, Tonton, Sakura, Hinata, and Kiba's mom were still standing there, all looking to him expectantly. Blinking, he browed his hands before him in a seal, squeezed his eyes shut, and called out, Kai. As his chakra flared, flaring his chakra again, he slowly opened his eyes, expecting the cruel genjutsu to be gone. But no, the small group was still there, all of them still watching him. Scratching his head, Naruto asked, what kind of genjutsu is this? To which Tsunade rolled her eyes and said, Naruto, trust me, this isn't a genjutsu. But why are you all here? The blonde asked, and Sakura smiled, wrapping an arm around her teammate's neck as she said, because we're going to be joining you, you big goof. What? But Sakura-chan, Hinata-chan, you can't just pack up and leave for me. Naruto cried, before looking to Tsunade as he said, and what about your position as Hokage? I didn't damn near kill myself to get you to accept just for you to blow it off. He finally looked to Tsume as he asked, and what about Kiba? How can you just leave your son for a stranger? Tsunade sighed as she said, Naruto, I refuse to simply sit by while those bastards on the council walk all over me and toss you out like trash. And didn't you say you thought of me as a mother? At the younger blonde's nod, Tsunade grinned and said, well, what kind of mother would I be if I let them abuse their authority by unjustly banishing my son and not follow him? As for me and Hinata, we both care about you, Naruto. We were offered the chance to join you by Tsunade-sama, and we willingly chose to join you. You're one of my closest friends, and I simply refuse to let you go out in the world all alone. You wouldn't last 3 days without me, Yubaka. Sakura said, and when Naruto looked at her, she stuck her tongue out at him playfully. But what about Sasuke? Naruto asked, and the pinkette's smile disappeared for several moments as she thought about the last Uchiha. Finally, she smiled and said, he's home, you succeeded. And besides, I think Sasuke would want me to follow you. Really? Why? Naruto asked, and at this her smile fell again as she said, I was a real bitch to you, Naruto, trying to get in good with Sasuke. At his confused look, Sakura said, but whenever I started being a pill, Sasuke would always defend you. Well, after you went after him, I was forced to do some serious soul-searching, and came to a realization. What? Naruto asked, big blue eyes staring hopefully at her, and she said, you didn't deserve the way I treated you, Naruto. You were always nothing but nice to me, no matter how awful I was to you. And I finally realized that. But when you and Sasuke were brought back, I was. Tears flooded green eyes, and she swallowed the lump down as she said, I was so scared that you were going to die, just to make me happy. And I would never get to apologize to you, or even just thank you. Before she could break down, Naruto wrapped his arms around her middle and buried his nose into her neck, tears quickly wetting her collar. Sakura stood shocked by the reaction, and awkwardly patted his back. Finally, Naruto broke away and giving her a smile, he said, Yo, you don't have to apologize, Sakura. But thank you anyways. You're welcome, Sakura said, her own tears flooding her cheeks. Clapping, Tsunade said, alright you two, I hate to break up this touching scene, but we really do need to get going before people start waking up and suspicion is aroused. We'll talk more later. Everyone nodded, and with 2 members of Team 7 quickly drying their eyes, they exited the large gates of Konoha. When asked hours later by several angry people, both Izumo and Kotetsu claimed they never saw anything. Which was true, due to the very interesting line of ants that happened to be making its way across the road carrying food back home. From their position on top of the Hokage monument, several Naruto clones nodded to one another with a wide grin. As one, they dropped the giant specialized henge that had been covering the monument while it was renovated, allowing the village to see what had happened. And at the sight of the improved monument, many people were pointing at it, either to scream in horror or to show others what caused a sudden fit of laughter. On top of a building with a prime position to see the monument, 2 Anbu were caught up in a fit of uproarious laughter, neither able to stand. They had both been drilled in the shinobi laws of conduct for years, but unfortunately they constantly failed that particular test. Lifting his mask to wipe his eyes, Shishiguro looked to his partner as he gasped, to told ya it was worth it. Panting, Yugo replied, when you're right, you're right. Both took another look before being overcome by another fit of laughter. For the monument, once of 4 faces proudly staring over the village of Konoha with a 5th in the works, was now of 4 faces all grinning down at the village in evident amusement. 3 of the faces were no longer of a former Hokage, but instead each was of the recently banished Uzumaki Naruto. And all 4 faces were painted masterfully, each face bearing a variety of kabuki-style face paint. The first was a grinning Naruto covering his eyes with his hands, the second was another grinning Naruto with fingers in his ears, and the third was also Naruto, though this one had his mouth covered with his hands. The fourth was still of Namikaze Minato, but now he was giving his best face-splitting grin, giving the village a one-fingered salute. Flashback no jutsu. Naruto wiped the sweat from his forehead on the back of his sleeve, splotches of paint adorning his clothes and face. Alongside him several more Narutos, each paint-stained and sweating, held their own paintbrushes. Hey brat, what are you doing? All the Narutos looked at the owner of the voice, a purple-haired Anbu wearing a cat mask, her wolf-masked partner beside her. Their expressions were hidden behind their neutral masks, and their arms were crossed over their chests, giving them the appearance of an angry parent. Just fixing up the monument as a gift to the village. Yeah, that's it, Naruto replied, smiling nervously and scratching the back of his head. The two Anbu looked to one another for a few moments before nodding and returning to watching the cop blonde. Well then, how about we give you some help? Wolf said, and Naruto gaped like a caught fish as he asked, what did you say? I said that if you're going to do such an enormous favor for the village, it would be rude of us to not offer you assistance. In fact, we know some Doden jutsu that would be perfect in your public service project, here. Cat replied, and the skeptical blonde asked, really? Of course, Naruto-san. Wolf stated, and as the two walked out onto the face of the first to begin working, Cat turned back and said, just so you know, many ninja and most of Anbu disagree with what's happening to you. Before following after Wolf, Naruto blinked several times and smiled, tears filling his eyes. Alright men, we've got a lot to do and not much time to do it, so I want all of you to be working double time. Understand? Naruto yelled to his clones, who all saluted as one and went back to work with renewed vigor. Flashback no jutsu. Kai. Most of the people laughing were shinobi, who had to both respect the level of skill for Naruto to finish such a project not only quickly but masterfully, and had to admit it was the blonde prankster's greatest prank. But what got most of the populace not doubled over in laughter more than the change done to the monument, was what had been done to the fourths. A change not even Naruto knew about until the henge was raised. 3 thin, whisker-like lines rested upon each cheek of the blonde-haired, blue-eyed Hokage, giving him an unsettling resemblance to the just-banished Uzumaki Naruto, made more apparent with 3 likenesses of Naruto sitting right next to him. A resemblance so close, that many of the council wanted to have the blonde executed and then run damage control before too many people began talking. From his position on the Hokage tower, Jiraiya folded up his spyglass with a wide grin. Part 1 of his plan was complete. Now, it was time to start part 2, along with several other side projects. Naruto sat staring at the small group of women, who were staring back at him. Sitting forgotten beside him was a plate of food, something mirrored by the small group of women across from him. Why is Kiba's mom here? Naruto asked, to which Sume answered, my name's Sume, Gaki. And I'm here as a form of protest against the borderline traitorous actions of the council in regards to your banishment. As for leaving Kiba and Hana, I talked to both of them, and we finally decided that this was the best option. Were there other options? Naruto asked, and the woman nodded as she said, yeah, but most of them would result in a roaring rampage of bloodshed and carnage, eventually leading to a bloody civil war between those loyal to the Hokage and those loyal to the council. Well, I guess this was the best option, Naruto said with a nod, and Tsunade sent Sume a look, which got the slightest of blushes and a scowl at the blonde-haired Hokage. Naruto didn't notice the exchange as he leaned back against the tree behind him, his arms crossed over his chest and his face scrunched up in his thinking look. They giggled at how adorable of his thinking look, the blonde cracking his eyes to glare at them before returning to thinking. This, unfortunately, caused them to giggle more. Finally, Naruto looked to Sume, tilting his head like a confused fox as he asked, but why would you care about me being banished? I thought most of the people on the council hated me because of. He looked to Hinata and Sakura as he added, you know. No what? Sakura asked, and Tsunade sighed as she said, alright you two, it appears that thanks to Naruto, I'm going to have to reveal some confidential information a lot sooner than I wanted to concerning Naruto. What about him? Sakura questioned, and Tsunade answered. Now, you both are aware of what October 10th is, right? Hi. It's the day that the Yondaime Hokage defeated the KY Kyuubi. Hinata replied, and Tsunade nodded as she continued, it is also the day Naruto was born. Now, what both of you need to understand is that a demon such as Kyuubi cannot be defeated by any mortal, nor can it be controlled. Well, except for those who had great-uncle Hoshirama's DNA, or the darkest, most twisted of Uchiha. But since the Yondaime was neither Hoshirama nor an extraordinarily evil Uchiha, he had but one choice, to seal the monster away. And you can only seal demons such as the Gobi or stronger into a human, or more specifically, a human baby. They're the only ones with chakra coils undeveloped enough to be able to handle the Biju's chakra being added to their own. Now, consider the facts and you'll have your answer. But I want you to remember that, much like a kunai sealed within a scroll, the scroll does not become a kunai. It is merely a scroll with a kunai sealed in it. Naruto watched for their reactions with bated anticipation, seeing an entire gamut of emotions flow across their faces as the two intelligent girls came to a realization with the information given. He winced, awaiting the hatred, the yelling, and finally the abandonment. However, what he never expected was to have two blurs tackle him around the middle, knocking him onto his back as two pairs of thin arms showed surprising strength by trying to crush him. As he tried to catch his breath from being tackled and squeezed, he heard two distinct voices babble incoherently between sobs. Managing to look down, he saw the familiar shade of bubblegum pink distinct to Sakura, as well as Hinata's own midnight mane. What? Naruto gasped, but all that did was cause the sobbing babbling to grow stronger, as did the pressure being exerted on his poor body. Slowly turning a very interesting shade of blue, Naruto felt himself beginning to pass out. Alright ladies, let the brat go before you accidentally kill him with kindness. Tsunade said, and the two girls quickly released him as they sat on their heels, allowing him to gasp for air, color returning to his face. So sorry Naruto. Sakura said, wiping her eyes on the back of her arm, Hinata nodding as she did the same. Pushing himself up off the ground into a seated position with one hand as the other held his chest, Naruto nodded and waved it off with a smile. We just didn't know that we were suffering under such a burden. Hinata softly added, and Naruto sighed, looking to his friends as he asked, so you don't think I'm the Kyuubi? Please Naruto, if you were the Kyuubi, you wouldn't be such a scrawny goofball baka, now would you? Sakura asked with a smile, sticking her tongue out playfully at her friend. Naruto tapped his chin in thought before giving a nod in agreement with a smile. Yeah, because if I was the Kyuubi, I would be 10 feet tall with a body chiseled out of granite, able to defeat Kakashi-sensei or even Hibiteme with the offhand flick of my wrist. Naruto claimed while flexing and doing very guy-like poses, getting smiles and eye rolls from his companions. And I'd probably be able to shoot lightning bolts from my eyes and fireballs from my butt. And I've never shot so much as smoke from it, Naruto said, turning and bending forward to put his backside on display, smacking it as he did so. Tsunade laughed, Shizune gave a resigned sigh, and the other three females all blushed as they studied the offered backside. Alright brat, now that we've all seen that flat ass of yours, we can get to work. Tsunade said, purposefully ignoring the scowl, pout from the blonde as he harumphed, sat down, and crossed his arms over his chest. But instead of showing them his anger at the remark, the trio of women merely noted how adorable he looked while doing it. Now, first thing we need to do is to pool together our resources and see what we've got to work with. Unseal everything you're carrying and group it in piles before you so we know a basic idea of what we have. Tsunade said. The others nodded, and began emptying their weapon pouches before them in small piles. They then began opening scrolls and unsealing weapons and other things. What the others quickly noticed was just how quickly the blonde's various piles were growing larger than theirs. Naruto, where'd you get all that? Don't tell me you spend most of your money on that stuff. Sakura said, and the blonde merely grinned as he said, nah. It's mostly stuff I found lying around, left by careless shinobi. You'd be surprised at what you can find if you just take a few seconds to do a little searching. I mean, I found kunai and shuriken that were practically new just laying around in the throwing range early in the morning, long after the last person went home for the night. And all the wire I've found is enough for dozens of large spools. Shaking his head, he said, I swear, some people can be so wasteful when they've never had to do without. And you have? Sume asked, and the blonde nodded as he replied, yeah, but that was a long time ago. After I met Tuchi Gigi and Ayame Ne-chan, I spent less on food and no longer had to choose between food or rent. Before anything more could be said, Naruto chose to change the subject by beginning to reseal much of his excess as he asked, so Kasen, what are we going to do now? Well, there's a town nearby called Otafaku-gai where we can resupply and spend a night or two to properly plan a course of action for our little group. We'll also need to get some new clothes for you, Sakura and Hinata. Tsunade said, and the blonde frowned as he muttered, but I like orange. I never said you can't wear orange, Sochi. Tsunade said, continuing, you just can't wear that jumpsuit anymore. It's a little too distinctive, and we're going to need to be less distinctive from here on out. Yeah, and maybe you can do something about those distinctive, hot air balloons on your chest, Tsunade-sama. Sume remarked with a grin, which received snickering from Naruto, Hinata, and Sakura, as well as a small smirk from Shizune. Tsunade merely frowned and said, you're one to talk, Sume. You'd have to be blind not to recognize the Inuzuka markings on your cheeks. Sume scowled in return, and Shizune sighed as she said, please don't kill one another. Tsunade Saichu, Sume-sama. Oh, don't worry Shizune, I won't kill Sume. I have more creative ways to repay our dear Inuzuka than childish insults or murder. Tsunade replied with a grin, and other women stared in horror at the thought of Tsunade telling the blonde boy her biggest secret. Do you know what's going on? Naruto asked Sakura and Hinata, who both shrugged. Naruto turned to Shizune and asked, how about you, Nei-chan? Do you know what's going on? The dark-haired woman merely sighed and said, unfortunately I don't, Naruto-kun. And that's what's scaring me most at the moment. Alright ladies and gentlemen, let's get going to Otafaku Guide before night falls. Tsunade suddenly spoke up with a smile, and the group quickly repacked and left, not leaving a trace they were ever there in the first place. Hitaki Kakashi smiled at the noon sun as he removed the orange-covered book from his weapons pouch, heading toward the hospital to look after his son. The Hokage monument was in the process of being repaired from Naruto's final stunt, one that got a chuckle from even the masked Cyclops. But as he found amusement in the remodeling, Kakashi purposefully ignored the similarities between his former student and his late sensei, even as they stood on display in the form of giant stone faces. Of course, now that the uproar had died down, people were questioning how exactly he'd managed to make such drastic changes in so short a time. Doing so would require a number of powerful Doden jutsu, and Kakashi made sure he knew every jutsu in the blonde's arsenal. And as he wanted, the blonde's arsenal was limited quite severely, with only 3 combat-useful jutsus. And none of them were an elemental jutsu powerful enough to do that. So Kakashi knew the blonde had help, but didn't know who it was. His list of suspects at the moment could be considered quite large, as the decision to banish the boy had been very unpopular amongst the shinobi population. The chance to aid in the prank and stick it to the council as it were could be seen as too good to pass up by many of them. As he walked, he ignored the glares and mutters from many shinobi who saw him, and mused that this must be what Naruto went through every day. Of course, he didn't have much use for the opinions of his fellow shinobi, because all that mattered was that Sasuke succeeded as a shinobi. When he spoke of ninja who do not care about their teammates being less than trash to Team 7, he meant that if Naruto and Sakura didn't care about Sasuke, then they were less than trash. The blonde and pinkhead were only stepping stones for Sasuke to reach the greatness he deserved, to make Obito and the Uchiha proud. Of course, he never thought that if Obito was to show up and learn of Kakashi's actions, he wouldn't be proud. The Uchiha would be disgusted beyond belief, and most likely rip Kakashi's implanted Sharingan eye out with his bare hand. But that didn't mesh with Kakashi's view of the world, so it was discarded, and instead replaced by Obito being proud of his best friend, and expecting nothing less for the second-to-last Uchiha. He would also be disgusted by the council's decisions regarding Sasuke and help make sure Naruto stayed in the place befitting him, as Sasuke's footstool. Turning a page in his copy of Icha Icha Paradise, Kakashi smiled under his mask, proudly wrapped up in the delusional fantasy he spent so long making, that he would probably snap should anyone ever unravel it. Entering the hospital, his feet automatically carried him to the room containing Sasuke, where he expected the child to still be forcefully asleep. But as he entered the room, his eye widened as he heard an all-too-familiar scoff that could only belong to one person. Lowering his book, he looked to the bed where Sasuke sat, black eyes focused on the silver-haired Junin. Sasuke, glad to see you're awake, Kakashi said, closing his book and returning it to his weapons pouch as the boy asked, why am I still here? In the hospital? Kakashi asked, but his student replied, no, why am I still in Konoha? I should be in Otogakure by now. You don't remember? Kakashi asked, and the dark-haired boy replied, "No. I remember the seal on my neck hurting, and black marks crossing my skin. But then all I remember is hatred, pain, and red chakra." "Red chakra?" Kakashi questioned, and the boy nodded as he said, "Yeah. Red chakra. It was covering Naruto, but I remember his chakra always being a light blue." Looking to his sensei, he asked, "Is it a Kekai Gekai I never heard of?" "No, Sasuke. It's—" The man sighed as he said, "It's something I can't speak of. But I assure you it's not a Kekai Gekai. You need to speak to the Hokage or Naruto about it." At that, the teen frowned as he said, "Where is Naruto? I want to talk to him." "You can't," Kakashi said, and Sasuke's eyes widened marginally as he asked, "Why not?" "Because he's been banished from Konoha due to events surrounding the mission to rescue you," Kakashi answered, and Sasuke blinked before he scoffed and asked, "Rescue? You honestly think the Dobi and his team were rescuing me?" "Yes. There's no way you would willingly betray Konoha. But don't worry, I know Naruto was the reason behind it, and you don't have to worry about him anymore," Kakashi said happily, and Sasuke smirked as he said, "You honestly believe that I did it because of the Dobi?" "Of course. Why else would you do it?" Kakashi asked, and Sasuke sneered as he said, "Because of you, Hitaki." Kakashi's smile disappeared, panic in his eye as he asked, What? "I said it was because of you. Training under you, I couldn't match Sabaku no Gaara. But Naruto, training under Jiraiya, not only matched Gaara but defeated him. If the Dobi could get that strong training under a Sannin for a month, then imagine how strong I could get training under a Sannin for a year or 3. Simply put, Hitaki, I realized how useless you were," Sasuke stated, his sneer growing. Kakashi blinked, his body slumping as the reality of what Sasuke said seeped into his mind. But the carefully created fantasy would not be so easily destroyed, and he quickly found a way to get back in his son's good graces. Kakashi straightened up, giving a smile as he said, "You're right, Sasuke. I wasn't training you properly." Sasuke raised an eyebrow as Kakashi continued, "After you get out of here, I'll begin really training you, and without Naruto to bug me and force me to take my attention off of you, I can really begin training you." Sasuke scoffed, and Kakashi's smile grew as he said, "In fact, I can even teach you the technique used by Naruto. By the time we're through, you'll be the strongest Hokage we've ever had." Sasuke stared at the man, but nodded as he said, "All right, I'll continue training under you." "Excellent," came a new voice, and both figures turned to the door, where Koharu stood, giving the duo a grandmotherly smile. "Koharu-sama, what brings you here?" Kakashi asked, and the elderly woman replied, "Why, just to tell our young Uchiha that as soon as he's well enough, he can return to training under you, Kakashi-san." Kakashi looked to the woman with surprise, but she merely nodded and sent him a silent reply that she'd tell him later. He nodded back and both looked to Sasuke, who was smiling happily. "Well, I should let you rest, Sasuke-kun," Koharu said, turning and hobbling out the door. "She's right, of course. You need to recover so we can get to some real training," Kakashi said, giving his student an eye smile before taking his seat, Icha out and open before him. Sasuke merely sighed, slipping under the covers and closing his eyes, pictures of a dead Itachi dancing in his head. As she walked out of the hospital, Koharu sighed and spit on the ground, as if something foul had found its way into her mouth. Continuing to walk, she stopped and sat on a park bench, holding her cane before her, awaiting someone. She was soon joined by the large form of Jiraiya, and as he took a seat, she tapped her cane onto the ground, a small genjutsu barrier coming up around them, making the bench appear empty, and their conversation silenced beyond the edge of the barrier. As soon as it was up, the white-haired sage looked to the elderly woman as he asked, "How did it go?" Kakashi looked like he was about 5 seconds from wetting himself in joy, and the Uchiha. "Well, the Uchiha looked about as smug as ever," Koharu said. Sighing, she leaned back on the bench and asked, "Are we doing the right thing, Jiraiya-chan?" "I don't know. We can only do what we can and hope that we don't fuck up too badly," Jiraiya answered, and the elderly woman said, "I just wish that we could do this in a way that didn't make me feel so dirty. I threw up a little in my mouth when I had to side with Danzo during the meeting, especially with Naruto-chan." "I know, Koharu-sama. But we need him to trust you as much as a man like him is capable of until we can dig that bloated tick of a man out and cure the infection he brought with him. And unfortunately the only way for him to trust you is for you to side with him in matters such as this, so you can get the information needed to finally be rid of him. Jiraiya said. The elderly woman nodded. She knew her teammate's student was right, but it still made her feel sick. Sighing, the woman smiled and said, "You know, Naruto-chan used to call me Ba-chan. He was always so cute waddling around Sarutobi's office with the Hokage's hat on his head." Her smile fell as she continued, "And now I'm an accessory to his banishment, throwing the blonde who used to see me as his granny out of his home. Worse of all, my granddaughter Moegi-chan found out and now hates me for banishing her, Ni-san, from Konoha." Feeling a heavy hand on her shoulder, she turned to the large man as he said, "I know, Kaharu. But I believe that when we can return him home and explain it to him, he and she will both understand and forgive you." She gave a weary smile as she said, "Thanks, Jiraiya-chan. You were always my favorite of Hiruzen students." Closing her eyes, her smile disappeared again as she said, "I just hope you're right, and my grandchildren can forgive me for what I've done, and understand it was for the good of Konoha." A scowl crossed her face as she said, "I've always hated those words. For the good of Konoha has been used to justify some of the worst crimes and greatest tragedies this village has ever seen." I know. Minato said those very words before he sealed the Kyuubi into Naruto, and Sarutobi used them when he explained why he kept me out of Konoha and Naruto's life for 13 years with lies, deception, and long-term missions in faraway lands. Jiraiya said, scowling as he remembered that conversation with the elderly Hokage. And it turned out to be their last conversation, which ended with Jiraiya spewing a bile-loaded rant at his sensei and storming out of the office, leaving an ancient-looking Sarutobi withered in his chair. Did you know that was the first time I ever had truly traitorous thoughts concerning Konoha, including killing sensei? Jiraiya asked, and the woman sighed as she said, "I've had that urge a few times myself as I was forced to watch that blonde cherub be all but abused emotionally from afar, unable to help due to both the council and Sarutobi to keep a low profile in concern to the blonde. Can't have influential figures showing too much concern for an orphan," was Sarutobi's excuse. You know what the sick part is? I believe that had I tried to do so, the only thing that would have caused Sensei to stop me is that he wouldn't want me to become a missing nin over it. Jiraiya said, and the woman as he nodded, and I believe, in a way, that Sarutobi Sensei was looking to die against Orochimaru. He was planning to use the Shiki Fuin all along, seeking to seal himself and Orochimaru into the Shinigama's belly. He probably felt that if he condemned himself to eternal torment alongside Orochi Teme, he could begin to forgive himself for the mistakes concerning both the snake bastard and Naruto. I know, Kaharu said, and both fell silent, deep in thought. After several moments, Jiraiya rose to his feet and said, "Well, I've got missions to give out, papers to sign, and a Machovalian plot to set into motion. Keep an eye on Danzo, and inform me if that old warhawk lets anything slip." "Alright Jiraiya-chan," Kaharu replied, slowly rising to her feet with a groan, muttering, "Damn Sarutobi. He never did tell me how he managed to avoid the pains of old age, the cruel old monkey." Jiraiya laughed and said, "Bye Kaharu-sama." She gave a small wave, dropped the barrier, genjutsu, and said, "Goodbye Jiraiya-chan, see you later." And with that, the two departed on their separate ways. Standing outside of Otafaku-gai, Tsunade grinned and said, "Welcome to our first stop on this training trip. Now, we need to decide who goes to get new clothes and who gets the hotel rooms for the night." Shizune thought for a few moments before a grin crossed her face as she said, "Well, I think me and you should go get the hotel room, Tsunade Shisho. We can let Tsume take our students to get their new clothes." Looking to her oldest apprentice, Tsunade noticed the look in the girl's eyes and couldn't stop a smile of her own as she quickly caught on. "Excellent idea Shizune," Tsunade said, turning to the dark-haired woman and shoved a wad of ryo into her hand as she said, "Here you go Tsume. You take this money and get the broths some clothes." She grinned at the look of shock from Tsume, but the blonde-haired Sanin didn't give her a chance to respond before turning her attention on Naruto as she said, "And you, Naruto, can get orange, but you'll have to make sure it goes with your new accessory." "What accessory?" Naruto asked, and both Hinata and Sakura hid their giggling as Tsunade pulled out a sealing scroll and unsealed a green Chunin vest, which she held out to him. Staring at in shock, the blonde boy barely heard Tsunade say, "Uzumaki Naruto, for performing above and beyond the call of duty on a mission well above your rank, I officially give you a field promotion to the rank of Chunin. Congratulations, Sochi." The gathered women watched as Naruto carefully took the vest from the buxom woman, giving it the reverence normally seen for a holy artifact. Sliding off his orange jacket and delicately putting the vest on, he closed it and stared down at himself, as if not believing it. Looking up to Tsunade, she smiled and hugged his neck, placing a kiss on his forehead as she said, "Believe me when I say that you deserve it." Straightening up, she smiled and said, "Now, come along Shizune. We've got hotel rooms to rent." The two women quickly left as Sume merely stood stunned at the newly minted Chunin before her. "Congratulations, Naruto," Sakura said as she quickly unsealed her own vest and slid it on, Hinata giving him a hopeful smile as she did the same. He looked over and stared at them, taking in their vests carefully as realization hit him. "Yo, you guys made Chunin too?" Naruto asked, and at their nods, he gave them a bright smile as he said, "That's great. 3 Chunin out to take the world by storm." Sakura grinned as she thought, Naruto dance of joy in 3, 2, 1. And on cue, he began jumping around, pumping his fist in the air, and shaking his butt as he whooped and hollered happily, ignoring the looks he was receiving from the people around them. Hinata blushed, smiling softly as she decided that today was indeed a red-letter day for her. Made Chunin, escaped her family, and has been able to look at Naruto's butt without having to worry about being caught several times. Yep, today was definitely a red-letter day for one Hyuga Hinata. Sume finally snapped out of her stunned state, looked from the money in hand to the direction Tsunade and Shizune left, then back to the money. Scowling, she muttered, "That sneaky bitch," as she shoved the money into her pocket. Turning to where Naruto was still dancing and being watched by Hinata and Sakura, Sume grinned, enjoying watching the blonde shake his ass without fear of being caught, much like Hinata was. After a few moments of enjoying the show being put on by Naruto, Sume cleared her throat and said, "Alright Naruto, while we could enjoy watching you shake that tight little ass of yours all day, unfortunately we have other things to do. Now come on, we've got to get you 3 more Chunin appropriate clothes." Naruto, Hinata, and Sakura stared at the woman in shock before Naruto muttered, "Are all the women in Konoha perverts, or is it just all those I know?" Sakura sent Hinata a look, and barely managed to stop herself from laughing as the former heiress blushed at Naruto's statement. Sume stopped and turned to the trio and said, "Come on. Are you going to come buy some new clothes, or are you going to stand there staring at my shapely ass all day?" She laughed as the trio sputtered before falling in line behind her, all 3 doing their damnedest to not look at her, their faces red as tomatoes. The quartet strolled through the streets, Naruto enjoying the fact no one was purposefully ignoring him nor were they glaring at him, merely treating him as another normal person. Hinata, meanwhile, was enjoying not being looked down upon or compared to the rest of her clan, most of whom that did so considered her to be lacking. Sume and Sakura, unlike their 2 companions, was simply walking, one lost in her own thoughts, the other merely enjoying a visit to another village that wasn't slowly dying under the stranglehold of a tyrant. Does Tsunade have a point about not shutting off the chance to love and be loved by the blonde? I mean, I haven't so thoroughly enjoyed watching a man shake his ass since Kiru died. And if what Enko has been claiming she heard from Shizune is true. Damn, it's been far too long. Sume thought, watching for a shinobi clothing store, or at least something close to one. Finally, she held out her arm and her charges stopped, following her gaze to the store that caught her eye. It wasn't large, but neither was it small, indicating it did a decent amount of business. The sign hanging above it read, "The Hawk's Nest," and a statue of a messenger hawk stood vigil over the doorway. Nodding to her companions, Sume walked into the building, followed by Naruto, Hinata, and Sakura. Looking around at the racks of clothing, shelves of sandals, shoes, gloves, and even blank Hite-8, Sume nodded, deciding this place was good. Turning to the 3 Chunin, she said, "Alright you 3, I need you to go pick out some new clothing while I talk to the man at the counter about something for Tsunade-sama." Now hurry up, and try not to be too loud in color, Naruto. Naruto scowled but nodded, Sakura wrapping an arm around his neck as she said, "Don't worry Sume-sama. Me and Hinata will ensure Naruto gets more, ninja-appropriate, clothing this time." "Right, Hinata?" Blushing from face down, Hinata gave a nod, seemingly so enthralled by the sight of her fingers poking one another that she couldn't risk looking up in case she missed a moment of it. "Good," Sume said, and Sakura nodded, leading the stunned blonde away, followed by Hinata. The former Inuzuka matriarch gave a chuckle as she watched the poor boy being dragged into what most men considered torture, and almost felt sorry for him. Almost being the key word. Standing back, the woman chuckled as poor Naruto was assaulted by Sakura and surprisingly Hinata, the two holding up different shirts, jackets, pants, and other clothes in front of him, trying to see how it looked on him before returning back to the clothes rack for more. Those that were accepted went into a growing pile on a nearby stool, those rejected were returned to the racks. Finally, after several minutes of being used as a dress-up dummy, several sets of clothes were shoved into his arms, and he in turn was shoved into a dressing room with orders to try them on and come out to model them. Smiling, Sakura said, "Well, that takes care of him. Now me and you can get properly dressed too, Hinata." Hinata nodded with a soft smile. The two entered the racks at a more resigned pace than when they'd been, helping Naruto, which left Sume shaking her head as she muttered, "Girls." Tsunade and Shizune walked through the streets, eyes scanning the buildings surrounding them looking for a good hotel, preferably one with its own onsen. As they walked, Tsunade stretched her back, which thrust her buxom chest out, which resulted in several men passing out from massive nosebleeds, and rolled her shoulders, taking a deep breath, releasing it as a deep sigh. "Let me tell you, Konoha was slowly beginning to suffocate me, Shizune. After so long being free to go as I pleased, having to stay in one place and be respectful and understanding to a group of hypocritical bastards who crow about the wool of fire and Konoha's superiority over the other violent, uncivilized villages while being every bit as violent and uncivilized. It was growing a tumor in my stomach, I know it." Tsunade said, her eldest apprentice looking to her. "To be honest, I enjoyed knowing where I would sleep each night and not having to worry about being woken at midnight by you, half drunk and breasts hanging free so we could get a head start on the debt collectors." Shizune replied, and Tsunade grinned as she said, "Yeah, that was nice for a while. But it couldn't stop the suffocating feeling I was forced to endure. Not to mention the paperwork and having to deal with the scheming, backstabbing, and double-crossing of the council in a never-ending battle to get and retain any scrap of influence or power for themselves and their families. Jiraiya always liked that cloak and dagger political shit, not me." Shizune nodded, having grown to hate that too, as well as the terrible funk it always placed her mentor and closest thing to a mother she ever had. She knew of only 2-3 people that could bring the buxom woman out of the arms of a depressive spiral as they took her close like an old lover before she could build the barrier of indifference around herself again. They were herself, Jiraiya, and the reason for their exodus, Uzumaki Naruto. "Damn, I forgot to put it on earlier," Tsunade muttered, and Shizune looked to her sensei curiously, wondering what she meant. She knew the elder woman was already wearing panties, and there wasn't a bra in the world able to contain her massive bussum. Anything else was quite easy to see. But before Shizune could ask, Tsunade had taken out a scroll, opened it, and with a quick nip of her thumb, dragged a swath of blood across a storage seal. In a burst of smoke, an all-too-familiar, conical hat appeared atop it. "Tsunade Shisho, you didn't," Shizune gasped, staring at the hat of the Hokage as it sat atop the scroll it had been placed in. She watched as her mentor casually took hold of it and placed it on top of her head, giving the dark-haired woman a grin. "The sun was really beginning to bother me, Shizune," Tsunade said, her grin growing, but the woman merely stared at the hat resting atop her master's head, muttering, "Tsunade Shisho. What, you didn't care when we cleared out the Hokage's library, took the forbidden scroll, or snatched Sensei's Saru contract. But the fact that I took a silly hat has got you shocked beyond belief. You really need to learn to prioritize things better, Shizune," Tsunade said, and the dark-haired woman blinked several times before a soft giggle escaped her throat. "And what's so funny?" Tsunade asked, and fighting down her giggling, Shizune answered, "It's just that you told me to prioritize better." Tsunade blinked, then realized what the younger woman meant. During their travels, Shizune was the logical, sensible one. The one who had to prioritize what was important for each day, because Tsunade was too emotional and illogical to perform the task. For Tsunade to tell Shizune to prioritize better. The pigtailed blonde joined her student in a good laugh, shoulders shaking as the hat protected her head, and got people on the streets to stare. Wondering why exactly the Hokage of Konoha had deigned them worthy of a visit, no doubt, and a little worried about what it meant for them. Tsume watched as Naruto turned in front of a mirror, studying his new clothes. He was dressed in a pair of tiger orange khakis that hung to his knees, black running with the stitching, including the back and side pockets. He now had his vest on over a black t-shirt, a short-sleeved hooded orange jacket hanging over it, the stopping above the elbows. His pants were held up by a leather belt with several pouches hanging from it, the buckle resembling a fox's head, a pair of fingerless black gloves with metal guards on the backs, and his feet adorned by a pair of black sandals. Nice choice, Naruto. Tsume said, arms crossed over her chest as she took in the exposed forearms and calves of the blonde, who grinned and said, "Yeah, I like it too." Hinata and Sakura said that it's better than my old jumpsuit, and it isn't as cumbersome either. Whatever that means. Speaking of which, where are those two? Tsume asked, and Naruto jabbed a thumb toward the dressing rooms and said, "While you were staring at me, they went in there to change together. I don't know why, but apparently they need help doing so." Tsume nodded as she said, "I meant it when I said I liked them, Naruto. Really accentuates your cute ass. It does what to my butt?" Naruto asked, turning mortified blue eyes on the woman, who grinned and said, "Don't blow a blood vessel, Naruto. All that means is that they show off your butt. And if you want to get you a girlfriend, the first step is to accentuate your positives, like those eyes of yours. Girls go giddy over such expressive and open eyes, makes a guy look deep and empathic, like good boyfriend material." "Really?" Naruto asked, curious, and continued, "What else will help me get a girlfriend?" Grinning, Tsume took a seat on a bench and patted the spot next to her as she said, "Take a seat, and I'll see if I can't help you become a real lady killer." But I don't want to kill them. I want to date them, hold their hands, maybe even kiss them." Naruto stated, and giving a sigh, she said, "It's a term, Naruto. All it means is that the girls will like you a lot." Blinking, the blonde gave a megawatt grin as he took the previously offered seat and asked, "So, how do I get a girlfriend?" Sliding an arm around the boy's neck, Tsume said, "All right. Soon's lady killer class is now in session, my young pupil. Listen well, and I promise you will get a girlfriend." The blonde nodded, paying more attention to her than he ever managed in class. Because unlike Iruka's lessons about the history of Konoha and the previous Hokages, this information was actually useful. As soon as they entered the dressing room together, Sakura had instantly realized her mistake. Gulping, she found herself fighting a blush as she kept her back to Hinata, instead putting her full attention on changing her clothes as she vehemently assured her duality to herself, and heard how lame she sounded. The problem was exasperated by the lewd, pornographic images filling her mind courtesy of the bane of her existence known as inner Sakura, who was going between moaning and crying in pleasure in her own voice and mimicking Hinata's doing the same. The pinkette had half a mind to just scream out loud for inner Sakura to shut the fuck up, but realized that would be a bad idea with Hinata inches away. "Sakura-chan, Ma, may I ask why you a personal question?" came the soft voice of Hinata as Sakura was stepping out of her pants, and Sakura gritted her teeth as inner Sakura took the opening and ran with it, telling a story that belonged in one of Jiraiya's Icha books, not in a teen kunoichi's mind. Gulping, Sakura replied, "Of course, Hinata." The pinkette could feel the eyes on her naked back as Hinata asked, "Is something wrong? Yo, you seem tense." "No, not at all," Sakura said, giving a nervous smile despite the fact she's staring at the wall before her. Hinata frowned as she realized that Sakura seemed practically obsessive about not looking at her without heavy clothing, and frowned eyes turned down. She should have guessed that her inadequate form would make the pinkette uncomfortable. It did the same for her clan. Hinata turned away, muttering, "Oh, I see. I understand. I'll just go." Sakura frowned as she asked, "Why?" "Because I'm obviously Ma making you very uncomfortable." Hinata replied, and Sakura's eyes widened as she realized how the emotionally fragile girl had taken her avoidance to look at her. Spinning, she gave a wide smile as she said, "You aren't making me uncomfortable at all." As she did so, her traitorous eyes started taking in the sleek, soft frame of Hinata, now unobstructed by her thick jacket and pants. She quickly found herself torn between sloppily drooling and being bitterly jealous of the lilac-eyed girl's form, which was something even women in their 20s would kill to have. The fact that the only thing keeping Sakura from enjoying every inch of Hinata's body was a pair of orange panties and an orange bra, matching Naruto's old jumpsuit in color, made it harder to look away. Tapping her fingers together, Hinata looked to her clothes, still looking like she wanted to get dressed and run in spite of Sakura's denial of being uncomfortable. Sakura gently patted Hinata on the shoulder and said, "Hinata." Sakura found her mouth suddenly dry, and not wanting to speak the words that she knew needed to be said, lest this happened again. But unlike with Sasuke, her normal confidence and self-assured nature was gone, which was causing her to begin questioning the reason behind that. Shaking it off, she swallowed and said, "Hinata. The truth is that I'm confused." Lilac eyes suddenly turned on the Haruno teen, confusion shining in them as she asked, "About what?" Pushing aside some of the clothes to clear off a seat on the bench, Sakura sat and hid her face in her hands as she muttered, For years I've had what I thought was love for Sasuke, forsaking everything else for him, including my own feelings at times. But after the incident a few days ago, I was forced to do a lot of soul-searching, and feelings I didn't know were there surfaced." Joining Sakura on the bench, Hinata sighed as she had an idea, but asked, "What key kind of feelings?" Well, first there's my blonde baka of a teammate Naruto. I was forced to really look at how I treated him, and how I treated him in return. I realized that while I was a complete pill to him, he has been nothing but kind to me, including being willing to destroy his own happiness for mine. God, I was such a shallow bitch. Sakura said, and Hinata frowned at hearing how she treated the nicest guy in Konoha, in Hinata's opinion, at least, but her MWNR began to dissipate as she realized Sakura had seen the error of her ways. Then there's why, you. Sakura said, and Hinata's eyes widened as she waited for Sakura to continue, nervous of where this was heading. Sighing, Sakura hugged herself as she said, I have been having thoughts. Traitorous thoughts about you and me, together. The last word was so soft that Hinata had to strain to hear it. As she did so, lilac eyes widened in shock at hearing those words. Really? Hinata asked, and Sakura nodded, continuing, I don't know what to make of them. For so long I've loved Sasuke, that I never thought about actually being gay. I can't be gay, I just know it. But when I think about you or Ino, I get a feeling in my stomach only Sasuke has ever given me. Fighting back a sob, Sakura whimpered, I even kissed Ino. And I actually liked it. What's wrong with me? Why can't I be normal? Hinata saw how this was agonizing her friend, and Hinata's caring, nurturing side took over as she wrapped her arms around Sakura and pulled her close. Sakura tensed momentarily at being against the Hyuga's nearly nude form, but as slender fingers began stroking a head of pink hair, green eyes flooded with tears as she wrapped her arms around Hinata and buried her face in the girl's shoulder, tears flowing freely. Shushing her and rocking softly, Hinata whispered gently, Sakura-chan, there's nothing wrong with you. You are normal, I promise. And no, I'm not. I like GI girls. How is that normal? Sakura cried, and Hinata blushed as she answered, because, and allowed it to end at that, embarrassed to continue. Sakura blinked, sniffling as she asked, because why? A dry, humorless chuckle escaped her throat as she continued, it better not be, because I said so. And no, Hinata said, and Sakura asked, then why? Sighing gently, Hinata replied, because when I was a little girl, my mom was pre-pregnant with Hanabi, but she was sick. One day she asked me to sit with her on the bed with her. She hugged me close and told me that she loved me, and she had something I am important to tell me. Sitting me in her lap, she gave me a weary smile and said that I shouldn't marry for clan pole politics, but for love. To not make the same mistake as her. Sakura sat in silence, enthralled by the story as Hinata continued, She told me that she cared for T2-sama, BU but didn't love him. She said that there was another person she loved, BU but could never be with. W who? Sakura asked gently. Eyes looked with Hinata's watching the swell of emotions within the lilac-colored depths. Hinata smiled and said, she said her name was Mi Makoto, Sasuke's mom. She explained how they'd been close as genin, and how they grew to love one another as time passed. Bu but unfortunately, Claw clan politics got in the way, and Foe forced them to be apart. To marry men they didn't love to make the elders happy. I was confused at first, and asked if it was okay for GI girls to love each other like boys and girls did in my storybooks. She laughed softly and said that of course it was. That there was nothing wrong with boys loving boys or girls loving girls. She then kissed my forehead and told me that no matter what, I should always love who I wanted, and not listen to those farts on the elders' co-council. I giggled and told her she was silly, and she smiled, tickled me, and said that I was her little raw ray of sunshine. Gulping, Hinata wiped the tears from her cheeks and continued, she died a short time later while giving birth to Hanabi. Mi Makoto-sama was at the funeral, and she cried like a woman who lost a love and not a fr friend cried. I didn't know at the time, but as time went on, I figured it out, and took mom's words to heart. Smiling sadly, Hinata looked to Sakura and asked, and my mom isn't a liar, is she? Sakura smiled back and shook her head as she said, no, I don't think she is. The two sat in comfortable silence before Sakura said, thank you, Hinata. For caring, and for telling me that story. You're welcome, Hinata replied, and Sakura grinned and said, we better hurry up and get dressed. Wouldn't want those two perverts on the other side of the door getting any ideas, would we? Sakura-chan, Hinata gasped in astonishment, but the pinkette merely stuck her tongue out and said, you know it's true, Hinata. Saint still, Hinata murmured, even as the two began getting dressed, a heavy weight beginning to drop from both their shoulders. When the two exited the dressing room in their original clothes with a few sets of clothes they liked in their arms, they quickly realized that not only were both Naruto and Tsunade staring at them, but the dark-haired girl sitting at the front counter was watching too, red eyes shining with curiosity. Mind telling us just what the hell was going on in there? Tsunade asked, and both girls blushed as Sakura answered, just having a heart-to-heart. Just having a heart-to-heart? Tsunade asked, an eyebrow raised and a mischievous smirk on her face, to which Sakura waved her hands before her as she said, we were not doing that. I believe you and Hinata aren't perverts like Arisenin, Naruto said with a confident grin, and Hinata smiled softly, her blush darkening at the praise received from the praise. Well then, why don't you and Hinata go out later, just the two of you? Tsunade suggested with a wink, to which the blonde blushed and said, I doubt Hinata would want to go out with just me. Giving a self-deprecating grin, he continued, I mean, who would? I'm just the orange-clad knuckle-headed baka, and no one wants that in a boyfriend. I do. Hinata and Tsunade thought at the same time, but Hinata spoke aloud, saying, I would be honored to go out with you. Really? Naruto asked, and at the girl's nod, Naruto's self-deprecating grin became a beaming megawatt smile as he said, okay. Say Hinata, why don't you and Naruto go get some clothes for a nice dinner together? Tsunade suggested, and watched as the smiling blonde and blushing girl disappeared into the clothing racks. Turning back to Sakura, Tsunade motioned to the bench and said, now you will sit down and tell me what you and Hinata were talking about. Do I have to? Sakura asked, and Tsunade said, Sakura, I want you to trust me when I say that you can confide in me. No matter what's bothering you, I assure you that you can come to me and I'll do whatever I have in my power to help you. Sakura nodded with a sigh, took a seat, and began telling the Inuzuka matriarch what she'd told Hinata.
That's all for now. If you want to see next part, then please like this video and subscribe my channel. Thank you.